Tuliongea jana utanipea sasa venye nimekuja hapo kufika
l'addition de tout. Sa question violente peut jaillir dans la lumière.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I can see in the chat that some people have having difficulties to hear any sound. There was no sound, I think, until now. So please indicate in the chat if you still have difficulties. Otherwise, I think we should start. It's 2 p.m. We have our 2 keynote speakers who have joined us. So let's start the event on time. Okay. So can I ask you to actually mute your microphone and your video when you are not speaking? Well, your video you can leave it on if you are a speaker, but otherwise please mute your mic when you are not speaking. And we have a chat function that you can use anytime to ask questions or to to indicate anything on the chat box, and we will do our best to actually address your queries. So let's start. First of all, I think, well, let me introduce myself. My name is Soraya Smaoun. I will be your facilitator for this first high-level welcome segment of our workshop today. I'm actually leading UNEP's effort on air quality. So really trying to put together a coherent framework of intervention of UNEP on air, whether it comes from science, whether it comes from a technology angle, policy angle, awareness raising, you name them. I'm very, very happy, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all today for this event. The number of participants registered, which was approximately 300 across a wide variety of stakeholders from governments, civil society, road agencies, and academia, is a great indicator of the importance of air quality and walking and cycling agenda in Africa and beyond. I'm excited to particularly welcome our 2 keynote speakers for this event. We are honored to count with the presence of Major General Mohamed Abdellah Badi, Director General of the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, and Her Excellency Dagwamit Moges Bekele, and excuse me if I don't pronounce your name right, Minister of Transport, Ethiopia. Both countries and also some of their cities are leading excellent work on addressing air pollution through, among others, non-motorized transport plans or policies. We will hear from them both in a minute. So today's workshop on the business case for investing and working in East Africa brings, as I was maybe saying at the beginning, two agendas that are very close to our hearts in UNEP: the air quality agenda and the non-motorized transport agenda. As you know, air pollution represents the single largest environmental risk to human health and the economy. Exposure to air pollution causes an estimated 7 million premature deaths annually. In addition to the tremendous impact on human health, some air pollutants also affect ecosystems, threaten food and water security, and contribute to climate change. It also tremendously affects the most vulnerable. Global urban air pollution levels have also increased by 8% in annual mean concentration of particulate matter, also known as PM 2.5 and PM 10, but I think PM 2.5 is really something that is of concern, between 2008 and 2011, according to the World Health Organization, WHO. On the other hand, walking and cycling are critical means of affordable transport, offering basic mobility and access to public transport. As zero-emission modes, walking and cycling helped to mitigate greenhouse gas emission and harmful local pollution. As we know and can see every day, in many African cities, a majority of the residents walk and cycle. However, allocation of resources to non-motorized transport is still minimal, and cities are not designed to accommodate the increasing need of non-motorized transport modes. But when invested in well, the impacts are far-reaching for air quality, the environment, road safety, access to basic services, livelihood, etc. So I think one of the main message and discussion that we could have today is really how to actually transform our cities and the way we move in our cities. We need to rethink the relationship with our environment. Even before COVID-19 lockdown ended after the first or second waves in Europe, cities began rethinking urban life. The pandemic really provided an opportunity to reimagine how we move and interact in urban environments. For instance, in the UK invested £2 billion to put walking and cycling at the heart of their cities, while Paris added 50 kilometers of protected cycle path and made 30 more streets pedestrian only. Of course, closer to us on the African continent, many cities have used this crisis to return their cities to people, and this helped reduce air pollution and also encourage, to a certain extent, social distancing. During the course of the day, we will actually hear from the cities and where they are in their journey towards active mobility. I think I'll stop there. And without further ado, I would like now to give the floor to our first keynote speaker this afternoon, Director General of the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, Major General Mohamed Abdallah Badi, to tell us about the experience of Kenya on walking and cycling. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I may start by recognizing the Ethiopian Minister of Transport, Your Excellency Dagmawit Moges, Christopher Cost, African Program Director, Institute of Transport and Development Policy, Gilbert Patrick, Global Program Head, UNEP, distinguished panelists and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to join you this afternoon in a virtual workshop on the business case for investing in walking and cycling in Africa. This is a very important topic for the African continent, where walking and cycling infrastructure is not fully developed. I therefore wish to take this opportunity to thank the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy and the United Nations Environmental Programme for organizing this forum to enable us to exchange views on the state of walking and cycling in the continent. It is my hope that by the end of this workshop, participants from different cities in this forum, myself included, will feel energized to do better. Ladies and gentlemen, the focus of my remarks will be on the state of non-motorized transport infrastructure in Nairobi and the investments being made to promote walking and cycling in the city. Nairobi is a commercial and transport hub in the East African region and has potential to grow. However, mobility in the city is a challenge due to traffic congestion and inadequate walking and cycling infrastructure. Majority of the private car owners prefer using their vehicles to work due to poor quality and unreliable public transport system, as well as absence of safe walking and cycling environment. We are all aware that walking and cycling has numerous benefits. They contribute to growth of business as people on foot or bike tend to buy more. An example here in Nairobi is Luthuli and Mamangina streets, which were pedestrianized. The value of the properties along these streets went up and business improved. When residents walk or cycle, they spend less on transport and are generally healthier and happier. These modes of transport are well utilized where cities have safe, convenient, and comfortable walking and cycling environment. This is what Nairobi Metropolitan Services is striving to achieve in the city of Nairobi. Fellow participants, I wish to state that the mandate of designing, developing, and maintaining transport infrastructure in Nairobi was under Nairobi City County Government and 3 road authorities, the Kenyan Urban Roads Authority, Kenya National Highways, and Kenya Rural Roads Authority. However, in March 2020, Nairobi Metropolitan Service was formed to perform the functions which Nairobi City County Government transferred to the national government, which included roads, transport, and public works. The transfer of these functions gave NMS the mandate of designing, developing, and maintaining transport infrastructure in the county of Nairobi. The advantage NMS had was at that time, its formation, both national and county governments had developed policy and guidelines on this matter. Vision 2030, Nairobi Urban Integrated Development Plan, and Nairobi NMT policy, and Nairobi Mobility Plan were all in place. All these policy documents focused on developing an integrated transport infrastructure system that is accessible, safe, convenient to all road users, including pedestrians and cyclists. Ladies and gentlemen, studies carried out on various modes of transport in the city indicate that 2.3 million people walk to their places of work or to places of social amenities, while about 60,000 people cycle to meet their daily trips. These constitute 48.3% of all trips made by walking and cycling, while on the other hand, 51.7% of people in Nairobi use motorized transport. There are many more people who would cycle or walk to their places of work if more investments were made towards improvement of non-motorized truck infrastructure. This gap gives us reason to invest in the subsector. A close examination of African countries' infrastructure budgets, Kenya included, shows that the resource allocation is inclined towards roads for vehicles. Minimal funds are dedicated towards improvement of non-motorized truck infrastructure. Through skewed budget allocation in Africa, we have ended up with cities that favor motorized transport with undesirable consequences of traffic congestion, noise, and air pollution. It is from this background that NMS was formed, and noting the disparities in infrastructure investment, we put measures in place to make a significant contribution. First, we identified key corridors within CBD to start with before extending outwards. We also came up with two colors to define the non-motorized truck developments in the county. Red color was for cycle tracks and black for pedestrian walkways, whether paved blocks or asphalt concrete is used. Within 1 year, NMS has constructed a total of 20 kilometers of pedestrian walkways and cycle lanes. I'm sure participants from Nairobi have noticed a difference along Kenyatta Avenue, Windimbingu, Wabera Street, Gara Ring Road, Railway Ring Road, Workshop Road, Dunga Road, amongst many others. And many more are coming. Tender documents for some are being processed. In the next 1 year, NMS has set aside Kenya shillings 1.5 billion to be invested to improve NMT infrastructure in Nairobi. Special attention is given on creating access to low-income and informal settlements and disadvantaged areas including Mukuru, Kibra, Kawangware, Mathare, Korokocho, and adjacent areas. To achieve this objective, we are working closely with Kenya Urban Roads to ensure that mobility in such places is improved. Over 400 kilometers of road networks are being constructed to improve mobility. NMS massive investment in NMT infrastructure is driven by the need to create accessible, comfortable, and safe walking and cycle environment in the city. It is important to note that NMS is developing a number of public transport facilities as a way of reducing congestion within the CBD. These facilities are well linked with the NMTs. As we develop NMTs, we have observed that traders, vehicles, motorcycle riders encroach to conduct business, drive, or park in these facilities. This makes it a challenge for the infrastructure to be used for intended purposes. Appropriate action is being taken and will be taken against those using such facilities for unintended purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude my remarks, I wish to note that despite the progress made by NMS on NMT improvement in the city, we have not done enough. We still have a long way to realize a well-connected network of walkways and cycle tracks. To be able to achieve this desired network, support, partnership, and collaboration with stakeholders and development partners is necessary. It is through these partnerships that we can create better cities that are livable, cities that we are all proud of. Cities that have good road infrastructure, public transport facilities, and service which are well integrated with NMT infrastructure. We therefore have a duty to invest in walking and cycling in all African cities. The time is now to invest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director General, for this very insightful presentation and also for updating the participants on the state of play of NMT, particularly in Nairobi. And as a Nairobi resident, I've definitely seen and enjoyed the bicycle lanes on Kenyatta Avenue. I haven't had the pleasure to see the others, but on Kenyatta Avenue, yes. Let me now turn to another country in the East Africa region, Ethiopia. I would like to say that Ethiopia, of course, is moving to promote walking, cycling, and public transport as congestion and air pollution continue to worsen. And I would like you to join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, who will take us through Ethiopia's investment on NMT, Her Excellency Dakwami Moses Bekele. And again, Minister, my apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. You have the floor. Thank you.
You pronounce it very rightly. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. We are now living in a world which demands more active mobility that aims reducing dependency on vehicle transportation. Many cities and communities around the world are encouraging active mobility with a view of reducing emission and ease of traffic congestion. Active mobility is not all about transition from one mode of transport to another only. It's rather considered as part and parcel of the economic, ecological, and social transition agenda that intends to bring sustainable development. As we are favoring active transport modes, world states are now determined heavily to invest in the scheme as it has multiple social, economic, environmental, and health benefits that many could easily understand. Investing in walking and cycling is like investing in our best way to save planet Earth, which has been in peril condition due to carbon emission and related climate change effects. Investing in active mobility is all about bringing efficient land utilization in our cities and bringing lively and vibrant neighborhoods. It's also meaning the reduction of transport costs and improvement of healthcare systems. Active mobility is all about the inclusion of the disadvantaged groups of the society, where elderly, women, and children could enjoy multiple of its benefits. And most importantly, investing in active mobility would heavily reduce the road safety challenge, which we have been affected highly. And above all, investing in active mobility is an ideal and most preferable way of expressing solidarity to mankind to live a decent life and safe world that we all deserve to cherish. Although investing in active mobility is ideal and sounds very great, yet the world still insists on using and giving priority roads for vehicles than roads for people. And one of the major reasons for this imbalance is related to low level of investment to non-motorized transport or NMT infrastructure and its related activities or services. In many African states, biking and walking in safe and comfortable streets have not yet become anchored in urban localities, as majority of concern regarding street is still favoring streets for vehicles than for pedestrians and cyclists. African states may have prepared national cycling and walking strategy, or may not have it. And yet, even after preparing robust strategy, we are grappled with the challenge of fully realizing the strategic initiatives through concretizing project investments. I also believe that the already existing attitude of road for vehicles mentality by itself may require a series of campaigns and attitude diversions, which require heavy investment by itself too. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, here in our country, Ethiopia, the majority of our people use walking as prior mode of transport. But despite the widespread use of non-motorized transport across the country, Ethiopian cities has largely been still car-centered, and much of our grand land use plan and local development plans and their applications favor streets for cars, which literally doesn't provide enough continuous walkways and bike lanes. To bring prior attention to active mode of transport and to enable our citizens access safe and decent transport options, especially in urban centers, Ethiopia has recently introduced and implemented its non-motorized transport strategy through the Ministry of Transport Development, in particular in collaboration with UNEP and ITDP Africa. And we thank UNEP and ITDP for their contribution. As to realize the contents of this active mobility strategy, we have established NMT steering committee and technical committees chaired by our ministry and one of the accountable institutions, which is the regulatory organ, the Federal Transport Authority. The steering committee is comprised of state ministers from Ministry of Culture and Tourism, Education, Health, Trade and Industry, Urban Development and Construction. The committee has regular meeting in every quarter of annual budget year. And in addition, the technical committee members are comprised of technical experts from the Ministry of Transport, Environment, Forest and Climate Change Commission, Ethiopian Roads Authority, Federal Transport Authority, WRI, as well as ITDP, which has a meeting scheduled on a weekly basis. As per the National NMT strategy, we hope to build 430 kilometers of pedestrian infrastructure and more than 300 kilometers of cycling tracks in the main secondary cities of our urban centers. In addition, the ministry's transport sector 10-year perspective plan, which we launched recently, calls for 3,000 kilometers of NMT facilities in Addis Ababa, as well as smaller cities. Construction of Addis Ababa's BRT system is ongoing, and we have also initiated plans to implement a bike share system in the city, following a conclusive feasibility study that we are carrying out currently. And also currently in Addis Ababa, 70 kilometers of upgraded walkways and 41 kilometers of cycle tracks have been constructed. Based on the NMT strategy, we have also prepared a 5-year period NMT transport implementation plan with the general goal to implement a safe and accessible non-motorized transport services in an organized and coordinated way on the selected cities and rural centers. This implementation plan has 18 major goals that aims to realize all the aspects required to aware, design, budget, implement, monitor, and evaluate the different NMT-related activities that we envision to see in Ethiopia urban localities. Among the goals, preparation of sustainable urban mobility plan and harmonized street design guideline, construction and expansion of quality and standard walkways for 69 cities and rural centers in Ethiopia, improvement of streets intersections, expansion of NMT transport corridors along river banks are the major ones. In addition, the plan is also aiming to ensure adequate lighting on the built non-motorized transport infrastructure, improvement of car parking supply and services, increasing access to high-quality bicycles through developing a bicycle standard that provides services to all members of the society, and establishing an incentive system to improve the supply of bicycle and spare parts are also among the major goals that we set. Moreover, the plan has additional goals that comprises improving cycle culture in schools and creating a conducive environment for cycling supply. The plan also discussed goals related to increasing public transport services through developing a mass transport service expansion strategy and development of a dedicated lane for public transport vehicles and implementation of BRT system in the secondary cities. One of the goals of the implementation plan, which is directly related to today's virtual workshop, is the goal that focuses on raising funds to expand non-motorized transport across the country through activities such as fundraising by submitting the implementation plan to financial institutions, that is lenders and donors. And also to enable Ethiopian Road Funds Office to focus on non-motorized transport and allocate necessary budget and encouraging city budget to focus cities and regional governments to focus on NMT transportation as the major alternative transport modalities. To conclude, as we were able to prepare and adopt implementing the contents of NMT strategy, much work and much effort is needed among the involving stakeholders as far as increasing the awareness and above all, identifying investment options to allocate funds for the study, for the construction, monitoring, and implementation of the cycling and pedestrian ways that we intend to realize. To bring such investment, I believe local administration, regional state governments, city administration, as well as line ministries should come together and work in coherent manner to mobilize their own assets so as to address active mobility. In addition, our accountable institutions such as the Transport Authority, Ethiopian Roads Authority, Road Fund Office must take bold action to address the demands and interventions that this implementation plan envisages. I also believe that donors and partners of the transport sector, as they have been supporting us in our different endeavors, we expect your active involvement to support us in this major concern to change our cities into vibrant role models of active transport that other similar towns and urban centers could benchmark and learn from. I wish you all a pleasant stay and a very successful workshop. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, and congratulations on the work carried out on non-motorized transport in Ethiopia. I think that through these two keynote speeches, you have set the scene very well for the sessions ahead this afternoon. I assume that you all have the agenda of the virtual workshop in front of you. This is actually already the end of the high-level opening sessions of the workshop. I'm very happy now to give the floor to our partners, ITDP, who is going to introduce the business case on walking and cycling, and then who will facilitate the next panel with the experts from different institutions. So I hope that Noor is with us. I would like to hand over the floor to Mrs. Noor El Dib, the Egypt country manager of ITDP. Noor, you have the floor.
Hi, Soraya, and hi, everyone. So Carol is going to share her screen. Okay. Fix my views. Okay, great. So Carol, would you please get the first slide? Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you today and to be amongst the speakers that we had. I'm Noor Dib, ITDP's Egypt country manager. And today I will be walking you through the business case that we have prepared that would show all of the country leaders and investors that why we should invest in walking and cycling and why we should start thinking of it as many other countries has already started, such as Kenya or Ethiopia, and why we need to pay more attention to such important mode of transportation. So to start with, I would like to show you how do people travel. We need to see how do people travel in African cities. So we have gathered different data for the mode shares for different cities. And we found that almost 50% of the mode shares is about walking. So many people in the African cities heavily depend on walking, and then public transport comes as the most second desired mode share. So as you can see, it's a cheap mode of transport. People are just using their legs, so why not use it? And that's why we would see a high percentage. But do you think that the infrastructure is really there? And like from what we can see in many cities, that the infrastructure is totally unequipped to make the walking and to make walking safe and dignified. However, many cities and national leaders have started to realize the need and for having more walking and cycling, and that we need to really pay attention to it. And I'm going to walk you through different reasons why we should pay attention to that. So first, let's start by seeing one of the streets in one of the cities, African cities, and imagine what are we paying attention to here. So next, please. So as you can see that we have dedicated a very large space for vehicle movement. We have also dedicated spaces for parking. But if you can see, what about the walking? There is no decent footpath. There is no cycle tracks for people to cycle. There is no public space where people can enjoy and gather. And also there is no organized street vendors. Next, please. So can we just keep on thinking of how to widen our roads? Next. So widening our roads represent short-term benefits. It actually attracts more vehicles, making the congestion worse, and it competes with the public transportation and the non-motorized transport. So let's look at the benefits that we can have if we invested actually in walking and cycling, and the threats that are arising from continuing of widening of roads. Next. So first of all, it's all about road safety. Like 90,000 pedestrians and cyclists, there are 90,000 pedestrian and cyclist deaths in the Africa region alone. And also the cost of road crash fatalities and serious injuries are huge. They represent around $128 billion. So can you imagine the amount of money that that road safety is costing us? Also, of which around 50 billion is attributed to the poorly designed NMT facilities. So we would really save lots of money if we started investing in NMT. Next. Next, please. Yeah, sorry, user expenses. Yeah, you're right. So another thing for the user expenses, sorry, Carol, can you get back one slide? Thanks a lot. So we have found that the annual costs of the cycling ranges between $200 to $400. By comparison, that if you have a car, it would cost you around the driving expenses from $3,000 to almost $10,000. So the cost of having a cycle and investing a cycle is really cheap compared to having a car. Also, the household findings found that the household travel findings from the household travel surveys found that transport accounts for almost 15 to 20% of household income, while in a walkable city, you would spend around 12%. Air quality. So another thing that contributes to the walking and cycling is, of course, the amount of air pollution that you have arising from cars and two-wheelers. Like air pollution has been predicted to be the world's leading environmental cause of premature death. And deaths in Africa from outdoor air pollution have increased from almost 1 170,000 to 258,000 in 2017. And when you come and think about it, like if a person cycled one trip per day more and actually drove one trip per day less for 200 days a year, that would actually reduce the mobility related CO2 emissions by around 0.5 tons a year, which represents, of course, a great percentage of the average per capita CO2 emissions that is only arising from transport. Next, please. Social inclusion has been another aspect. Like 80 million Africans, or 10% of the population, do have disabilities. That's why we need to provide accessible infrastructure, because it will help them have access to different economic opportunities. Next, please. Another benefit is the public health. In fact, we have a dual challenge in that region, that around 41 million children under the age of 5 were found obese. And at the same time that we have many people are still suffering from hunger. So a benefit that would come from public health is that walking just 1 kilometer per day is linked to a 4.9% decrease in the likelihood of obesity, and also lowers the risk of heart disease. So can you imagine the benefit that we can get from just having a decent footpath where people can enjoy walking for at least 1 kilometer per day? Next, please. So during the COVID, we have found that many European cities have started having pop-up bike lanes. Like for instance, Bogota had around 80 kilometers of bike lanes, Paris had 50 kilometers of bike lanes. And when they found how beneficial those bike lanes were for the health and for the public and for many of the reasons that I have mentioned, few of them, they started shifting those bike lanes into a permanent bike lanes. But what about the African cities? Next, please. So we really need to start like changing our thinking from giving the cars like a big portion of the street, and start thinking in a more equitable approach by providing the other different modes a good space in the street as well. Because as we have seen that most of the cities depends on walking, and we need to encourage that. Next, please. And in fact, we have seen that many African cities have already started thinking of a more equitable approach. For instance, a city like Dar es Salaam, as we can see, that they do have found, this is a street, it's a complete street, I would say, because there you can find a street dedicated for pedestrians, a street dedicated for cycle tracks, another corridor for bus rapid transit, and lastly for the cars. Next, please. So we really need to start moving on to that direction in order to have a more equitable approach. So after mentioning the reasons, we need to think of how to quantify the benefits across the continent. So we have set up a model that compares the travel patterns under the business as usual and the sustainable scenarios. And that model, it inputs information such as the population, the growth rates, city sizes, trip rates, and different modal splits in order to calculate the different desired outputs. And it has been calculating the investment that a city would require over a 10-year span in order to achieve a sustainable transport scenario. And the outputs that we have got and that I will be discussing over the next few slides are outputs such as the fuel consumed, the pollution generated, fatality rates, and also the number of infrastructure that we need. We have also used the UNIP and the Center for Transport Studies Share the Road project assessment tool in order to calculate the emission factors. So for that model, we have focused on 188 of the largest cities in the African region, which have a combined population of around 390 million by 2030. And estimated daily trips that are being done today are around 77 million. And that includes walking, cycling, paratransit, metro, taxi, different modes of transportation that I will be showing now. Next, please. So for the business as usual scenario, as you can see that the number of trips, like the number of trips, if you focused on cars, we would see that the personal motor vehicle use is growing around 7% per year. Also, the difference between the two scenarios that you can see that there is almost no investment that has been done in public transport and walking and cycling. It's almost stagnant. And also there has been declining in the walk and cycling and public transport shares. And the consequence of that is that you have more than doubling of person motor vehicle use in the next 10 years. So as you can see, if we kept on thinking by the way we're doing right now, our actually motor vehicle use will be on the rise forever. Next, please. When we come and think about the sustainable scenario, it assumes like it's built up assuming major departures from the business as usual scenario in terms of the travel trends. So you would see that the overall growth trajectories in travel are assumed to be the same, but shifts to public transport and also non-motorized modes. So in the sustainable scenario, you would see that the cars and the two-wheelers have decreased, and actually the walking and cycling have also increased. Next, please. So how can we get to achieve the sustainable scenario? For the total population, we need to invest in around 12,000 kilometers of cycle tracks, 30,000 kilometers of footpath, 5,000 kilometers of BRT, and 800,000 cycles in order to be able to reach to the sustainable scenario that takes other modes into consideration and somehow have like a cap for the cars and next, please. When you come thinking about the infrastructure spending, you would see that the results indicate in the BAU scenario, the infrastructure costs for the roads, it almost dominates all of the other infrastructure costs. This is because vastly more kilometers of roads are built than any other type of transit system. And however, in the sustainable transport scenario, the length of roads drops dramatically. Despite that around 30,000 kilometers of footpaths and the 12,000 kilometers of cycle tracks are built for 2030, it's barely visible since the investment needed is only around 13.3 billion, which is a very small number compared to the other costs. And when you come to think for every million urban residents, you would see that for the BAU scenario, it would cost you around $725 million US, while for the BAU scenario, so for the sustainable scenario, around $500 million US. Next, please. Of course, that will also affect the fuel spending, since you're reducing also the number of cars and two-wheelers used. So we have witnessed that from the BAU scenario to the sustainable scenario, you would have 57% reduction in urban passenger transport fuel costs, which is evaluated around $43 billion US. Next, please. About the road crash fatalities. Reducing the vehicle kilometers of travel and increasing the use of active walking and cycling modes with decent infrastructure might be anticipated to reduce the incidence, of course, of road crash fatalities and it would reduce injuries. So from the BAU scenario to the sustainable scenario, there has been a witness of 60% reduction in road fatalities by 2030, which is evaluated at around 45,000 per year. What about the CO2 emissions? For the CO2 emissions, we have found that also there would be around 60% annual reduction between annual reduction due to the fact that we have decreased the car and the two-wheelers, which represents a huge or main modes that produce CO2 emissions. And as you can see, also the decrease is huge. We have also looked at the local air pollutants at the PM emissions. So in fact, exposure to these kind of pollutants can cause you severe environmental damage and is really associated with increased risk of death from respiratory diseases. So thinking of a more sustainable scenario, you would see that the paratransit is dominating the PM emissions. However, if we start thinking of new modernized buses that uses a cleaner diesel, Euro 3 or higher, or you would have like electric vehicles, you would find that the PM emissions would even go less in the sustainable scenario. Next, please. So, in fact, many African cities have now like live demonstration of actions that they have done in order to promote walking and cycling. And these, I'm going to show you a few examples that we need to learn from and we need to build on. So for instance, in Dar es Salaam, in the BRT corridor, they haven't done only like a bus rapid transit system, but they reformed the full street, where we had cycle tracks and decent footpaths that were there, wide and spacious walkways that have improved walkability. Next, please. Also in Kisumu, they launched the Triangle Project, which has been proven that it really improved walkability. As you can see, the footpath here is almost wider than the car traffic lanes, which is what we're actually looking for, because we said that almost 50% of the people depend on walking. Next, please. So for also, as the minister has said, Addis Ababa has launched recently their NMT strategy, where they were planning to build 600 kilometers of new footpath and 200 kilometers of dedicated cycle facilities over the 10 years, which I believe it's a great strategy that we should all learn from, because this is what we really should be thinking of over the coming 10 years. Next, please. So at the end, I would like to conclude that we should really start thinking of rapidly developing NMT structure on a larger scale. And also many cities need to start investing in complementary public transport systems in order to accommodate a wide variety of trips. Another point is that we need to coordinate between the transport and the land use plans in order to reduce the trip distances in order to make NMT more viable. You would see in many cities that city planners are like directing their or having their projects in one direction, and you would find that transport planners are working separately on their own. But we really need to think of how to merge those two important like authorities in order to be working on a more viable NMT structure. Also, we need to think of adopting parking management systems in order to put a price on driving, because when you have like very cheap parking fees, people will be encouraged to drive more actually. Also, we need to dedicate fuel taxes and parking fees and other transport revenues towards sustainable transport in order of dedicating it to more of building more roads and bridges. Finally, we as policy decision makers, we need to repeal the fiscal policies that subsidize more vehicle use and actually encourage people to cycle and walk more instead. And by here, I get to the end of my presentation, and thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Noor. That was a very informative presentation, and the next panel will definitely discuss a little bit this in more depth and in more details. But maybe before we move to the next panel, there have been a lot of activities on the chat. So I would like to take this opportunity to maybe address a couple of questions. First to our keynote speakers, whom I hope are still with us, and then to you, Noor, on your latest, on your presentation just now. So let me just, first of all, check that Director General and Minister are still with us. Yes, thank you very much. And the Minister of Transport, Her Excellency, is she still with us? Okay, maybe not, but I hope that someone can respond on her behalf. So, Director General, there was a question addressed to you that I hope I'm going to find. I'm sorry, just bear with me for a second. Okay, I found it. So the question is from Ken Kanhia. Is the service, so question to the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, is the service utilizing the prepared street design manual for urban areas in Kenya for the design and implementation of non-motorized streets within Nairobi? And I'll give you the floor.
Yes, when we formed NMS, we inherited a lot of documents from Nairobi Regeneration Program that included the street designs, the NMTs. We had to surrender some of the parking space in order to accommodate the NMT corridors. And the question was, where will you take all these parking spaces that have been eaten up by NMT corridors? So now we are designing underground parking to accommodate the widening of the roads and, of course, the NMT corridors. Yes, so the street design manuals, we have inherited them from different organizations and Nairobi Regeneration Program. So we have gone through those manuals, and the specific designs were created for different roads. So yes, we have accommodated everybody's suggestion while improving NMT corridors within Nairobi.
Thank you very much for your response. There was another question for Ethiopia. How the security issues will be managed as Cycle has no energy storage or engine to support GPS and other tracking technologies. I'm not sure the minister is still with us. Director General, if you have any views, please feel free to take the floor.
What was the question, please?
How the security issues will be managed as Cycle has no energy storage or engine to support GPS and other tracking technologies.
Yes, in Nairobi, we have incorporated the smart light system, which has within the street lighting, there are cameras, street cameras. So these, all these street cameras are interlinked to the security system so that we can be able to see the pedestrians and the cyclists throughout their movement within the city. So the security is actually taken care by the cameras incorporated in the street lights.
Thank you. And as you were responding, there were more questions coming up for you. So I'll just read them. Encroachment of the NMT facilities is a big issue that needs to be dealt with. Maybe better enforcement mechanism. And do you want me to read all of them, or you want me to give you the floor? Okay. And then another one is, what is NMS doing about people and businesses that are spilling onto the pedestrians' walkways, especially on Gong Road? And finally, what plans have been put in place to accommodate? Well, this one is to accommodate cyclists in Mombasa. So that's not Nairobi, because we are having hard time when cycling. Over to you.
The encroachment of NMT and is actually, the two questions are interlinked, because encroachment of NMT corridors in Nairobi are by the street vendors. You can say business personnel. They sell their either fruits or clothes or whatever on the NMT. We had an issue because of COVID. Initially, we didn't want to use force to remove everybody that have encroached on NMT. But now we have designated different areas and put enforcement officers and given notice to anybody that is displaying their business on NMTs. They will be confiscated. So yes, we have given them notice because we don't want to use force immediately. After that, we'll be forced to use the enforcement to remove them by force from NMT corridors. So that is our strategy, and we'll keep on monitoring to ensure that nobody comes and sells their wares on NMT corridors. The other problem on NMT is the boda, the cyclists using the cycling lane. That is forbidden. So we are now, we have approached the county assembly to enact laws that will fine the boda people if they use the NMT corridors. So all these are in progress, and we hope we'll be able to control all NMTs within Nairobi City.
Thank you, Director General. So I'll now turn to Noor. There is a question for you, Noor. Does the net decrease in investment going down the sustainable route also include the investment required in better, cleaner, cheaper public transport?
Okay, that's actually a very good question. So yes, for the sustainable scenario, we have included the cost in order to build bus rapid transit, which is considered as a cheap rapid transit systems compared to, for instance, buildings, constructing metros or monorails. We have also thought of having modernized buses instead of many of, I would say, the minibuses that are being used, but depending on the demand, we would have better modernized buses that people can use. So yes, my answer is yes.
Thank you very much, Noor. And also some people were asking about the link to the report. So I guess this will be, of course, shared once the report is finalized. Great. Well, thank you very much to our speakers. I would now like to turn on to Chris Costs from ITDP. Thank you, Chris. We can see you now. So I'm handing the floor back to you for the next session and the panel on walking and cycling. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Soraya. So I'm very happy to be with everyone today. I'm Chris Koss, the Africa Program Director at ITDP. And I'm very happy to kick off this panel where we'll have further reflections on the case for walking and cycling. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion. We have 4 panelists who are with us today, and I'll introduce them as they get into their brief presentations. So first, I'd like to invite Honorable Tawfiq Bilala, the Minister for Transport, Infrastructure and Public Works with the County Government of Mombasa, to present his presentation. Over to you, Tawfiq.
Thank you very much, Chris. Sorry, I was heading also to another meeting. That's why, but I had to, I know this was important, so I had to also attend this. So I'll try to balance between the two, and probably I'll leave you immediately I reach my destination for my other engagement. But thank you very much, Chris, and thank you very much, everybody, for having me on this panel. I'm the County Minister for Transport and Infrastructure in Mombasa County. We are the ones tasked with all the road infrastructure and the transport modes within Mombasa County.
I think we might have lost the connection. Let's see if Minister Bilala will be back with us.
Yeah, sure, Chris, I'm here.
Oh, now I can hear you. Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, you wanted me to give a small brief, isn't it?
You can go ahead with your brief, and Carol will also share your slides.
Sure. So Mombasa basically is a city with a population of slightly over 1 million people. In Mombasa, we have 33% of the citizens who walk. They go about their affairs during the whole day just walking. They never use any sort of motorized mode of transport. They use their feet to move from point A to point B. We have 11% who use private transport, of which only 3% own those private transportation, and 11% of the population use public transport. We have only 4% who use cycling as a mode of transport. Obviously, the 4% is very small because we don't have corridors for cycling. The way Mombasa was designed over the years was just for cars. We also recently only started putting a lot of importance on the walkways, because in the past we never saw the importance of walking, but only started recently. I stumbled upon a report by the World Bank that was done some years back, and we saw sense in the study that was done. Now, when the first we decided to embark on building the footpaths, but we had many challenges, and the challenges were over the years. A lot of the footpaths were broken and made into parking spaces for the vehicles, private vehicles. A lot of the outdoor advertisements were also, the furniture for the outdoor advertisement were placed on the footpaths. The Kenya Power and Lighting Company also put their electricity poles on the footpaths, and we ended up not having footpaths at all. So people were walking on the road and sharing the same road with the vehicles. So we decided to now create the footpaths. But when we did that, we still realized that people were still parking on top of the footpaths. So we knew that we needed a lot of civic education and change the mindset of people. It was very difficult, and then we decided to make the footpaths red, a different color from the roads, and called it the red carpet. Whereby we were proving to the citizens that the walking citizen was more important than the citizen who drives a private car. And psychologically, it started working because we also used a lot of enforcement. And even when you park on a red footpath, you psychologically feel that you're not in the right place. So that worked a lot. And slowly but surely, people started respecting the footpaths and stayed away from them. Now, this task was very, very difficult because when we allocate budget for the financial year to come for roads, we have, by law, we have to go through a public participation. So we engage the public in the projects that we want to do and take their comments and views. Most of the people in the public were already brainwashed by the political class that any sort of development record by any civil servant or politician was based on the roads that they built and how many kilometers of road were built, but not on the footpath. So even the people on the ground who even don't own vehicles and don't even use public transport were engaging us on how many roads we've done, and they would want this road to be done and that road to be done. So we tried to educate them that, listen, we are all talking about the roads, but why can't we also allocate some money for the footpaths. It was very difficult, and nobody saw the sense in that. So we did it slowly, and we started with the CBD just to showcase the importance and of the footpaths. And the public started seeing the importance of the footpaths, and then also we had to widen them to at least 5 meters wide. Initially, they were about 1.5 to 2 meters wide. But you know, when you walk with a group of friends, you end up walking in a single file because the footpaths were very narrow. So to get the 5 meters, we had to eat up on some roads, and also eat up on many parking spaces. This brought us a lot of problem from the selfish population, from the selfish percentage who have private cars. And of course, you know that these guys are very influential. So we had a lot of problems. In fact, I survived an impeachment in the assembly just because of things like that, you know, disrupting doing away with the parking spaces, because we did away with hundreds of parking spaces and created the footpaths. But slowly but surely, a lot of people started seeing the sense, and it's becoming better than it was. On the cycling, we have a problem because we don't have, the roads were not designed to give that extra lane for the cycling lane. So right now, what we are doing is that we're working with ITDP to see where we get the cycling corridor, and we have identified a few streets where we can start as our model. But eventually we might have to change some streets from a two-way to one-way so that we can have the cycling lane, so that we can have all the cars going in one direction and have one huge ring road maybe in the island of Mombasa, and that way we'll be able to have space to get that extra lane. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Minister Bilala, for those remarks. And it's really amazing to see that journey that Mombasa's taken and how you've been able to convince a number of different stakeholders that this is the right way to go. And with that, I want to introduce our second panelist, Catalina Ochoa. She's a senior transport specialist at the World Bank. And the question I want to pose to Catalina is, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much, Tawfiq. Yeah. So, as Tawfiq was saying, traditionally, the metric for measuring progress on transport infrastructure is the number of kilometers of roads that have been built. And traditionally, when it comes to development bank investments, a lot of times it's easy to make the case when you're building a new road. When you do the cost benefit analysis, you can you look at how much the cars will be sped up, and it's easy to do that travel time estimate and then make the case for a road widening. And so we were curious to hear from you. How is the World Bank going about broadening the set of criteria that go into deciding whether you'll make a certain investment? And is it just based on travel time savings for the private vehicles, or are there other factors that we should consider now? So over to you, Catalina. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Chris. I stopped my video because I'm on a hotspot, so I apologize for that.
No problem.
I think it's better this way so you can hear me.
Yeah.
Do you want me to address the question or to go into my presentation? Happy either way.
No, feel free to go into the presentation. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm also happy to answer that question. It's a really good question. So let me see if you see let me know if you see my slides.
Yep, now it's there. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So first of all, thank you everyone for this invitation, ITDP. And I mean, the previous presentation was amazing. Thanks, Minister Bilala, for showing us that. So I don't know if I can do as good of a job, but that was definitely a great presentation. I'm going to speak about the recent study that the World Bank carried out in Tanzania, which had the objective of understanding better urban mobility in these intermediate cities and provide some recommendations for future policies and programs at the national and subnational level with a strong focus on intermediate cities. And the idea here was to, for the first time, make the case for creating a proactive agenda for sustainable urban mobility in intermediate cities, which as of now was inexistent. And why the focus in the cities? Mainly because these cities are kind of left behind when it comes to thinking about urban mobility. We typically focus on the capitals. And the cities are at a very early stage in their urbanization process. And we've learned that retrofitting can be way much more expensive than doing the proper transfer planning from the beginning. And there's also a short window of opportunity for the cities to act, because as we know, the cities would have smaller resources than cities like Dar es Salaam or Mombasa or Nairobi to be able to do that retrofit. So it is very key that the investments are thought from a strategic perspective and that lead from the get-go to sustainable mobility. So our report looks at many dimensions. I'm not going to cover them all, but here I would like to share like 3 findings related to non-motorized. One is related to modal split. The other one is to reflect on the accessibility, which I think connects, Chris, a little bit with the question that you just asked me. And finally, one finding on road allocation, which also resonates with some of the things that we've heard from the ITDP presentation. So the first finding is on modal shift, and based on what we've heard today, this will not be a surprise or news to this community, but it's sometimes not recognized for policymakers, and is that presently in these intermediate cities in Tanzania, they have almost like an ideal modal split if you look at it from many perspectives. And this is the numbers for Mwanza, but this reflects almost all of the intermediate cities in Tanzania. And what we see is the majority of the people travel by non-motorized modes, the vast majority, and a significant minority travels by public transport, mostly dala-dalas, and a very, very small minority uses private cars. Like we see, it's less than 4%. However, this is not as good as it seems, because what we find is that the reason why people walk and cycle and use public transport is not because they like it necessarily, but it's because they can't afford anything else. In particularly public transport is quite unaffordable. I mean, not to mention motorcycle and automobiles, but we found that on average, Tanzanian intermediate cities spend 5% of their budget in transportation. And this is pretty high, considering that the majority of them walk. So actually only 20% of the richest households spends more on transport than what is necessary to cover a 2 dala trip. So you can see how unaffordable transport is. Then the other key finding is that bicycling is really underutilized relatively to its potential, and is obviously, or presumably, due to the lack of infrastructure. Less than 10% of the trips are made by bicycle. And while this is at par with other African cities, the potential is huge. There's countries, as you know, where cycling can make up to 60%, like in Chinese cities. And it's also all the reasons that were mentioned, reduces risk of diabetes and avoids greenhouse gas emissions, etc. So the key here is that cycling is really has a massive untapped potential. And then the final finding on this slide is that the smallest minority of travelers are drivers, and they receive the vast majority of attention from government and resources. So there is an issue of equity here that we need to pay attention to, as obviously now majority of resources go to the minority of people, and that's just not okay. Now, from an accessibility perspective, which is something that I think could complement very well the study that ITDP made, and it also relates to the point, Chris, that you raised about making the case for road expansion versus non-motorized. We conducted an accessibility analysis in the intermediate cities in Tanzania, and for those of you that might not know, accessibility is now the key indicator that the World Bank uses to measure the effectiveness of public transport. So it's no longer kilometers driven. I don't think you would see in any World Bank project today, urban transport project, kilometers of road built as an indicator of impact. We talked about access. We have shifted also from the other indicator that we used to use long time ago, which is the average distance to public transport, or because also proximity doesn't mean access. So this was a big shift for us in the recent years, and now every project has to be explained through an accessibility perspective, which speaks about the ability of people to access job opportunities by public transportation of non-motorized modes. So so here I think the key finding is that in Tanzania, cities have still some decent accessibility, but if people would actually cycle, this accessibility would be dramatically improved. So here we go from 57% of access to all jobs in the city by 1 hour in public transport to 76% of access to jobs if people would cycle. And this is quite striking. Sorry. And this is quite striking. I don't know what happened to my slide, but this is quite striking because to achieve this increase in accessibility it would cost a lot of money. It would require significant investments in public transportation and infrastructure to be able to achieve an increase from 50% to 70% in accessibility. So that's a very important finding if people would use cycling infrastructure, if there was cycling infrastructure. And then finally, another analysis that I wanted to point out was a road space allocation analysis that we have in our report, in which we assess how from the distribution of space perspective, some modes are favored over others. So basically what we use is we use satellite imagery to look at all the intermediate cities in Tanzania. At the downtowns, we classify the space and whether it was used for pedestrians, whether it was for cars, for parking, etc. And we found that valuable public space in central areas is allocated to parking. This was also discussed in the previous presentation, but we also have numbers for that, which, as we know, has very low social return on investments and benefits comparatively very few road uses. So, for instance, this analysis shows that in cities like Arusha, parking can take up to 50% of the road space, and actually 50 to 70% of the sidewalks in the downtowns that we looked at were used for parking. So again, it's also about looking not only at the fairness in the distribution of resources, but also in the fairness of the allocation of public space. So, so this to say that the business case is clear. Non-motorized is the most cost-effective way to increase accessibility and slow down the automobile dependency, because this is the cycle that we're looking at. No, cities that experience congestion build their way out of it with roads, which prompts urban development along these roads, which encourages sprawl. People live in this urban periphery are too far to walk. Then this increases the demand for motorized transport, and as a result, cities are have lower accessibility, which hinders their potential. And as a result, many Tanzanians, and I think this applies to other African cities, will be left behind, unable to afford public transport and living far from opportunities. So I'll stop here. I hope this contributes to the discussion on the business case, and happy to provide more details on our study. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Catalina. And that's a very emphatic case for changing the way that we invest. And I find that point about the road space allocation, very poignant. And I think that's true in a lot of our cities, that we have, in many cases, we have good footpaths, but we let cars park all over them. And so it represents a really wasted investment, and it's really a poor allocation of that valuable space in the downtown areas. So great. So let me bring up our next panelist. So I'd like to invite Richa Upadhyay, who's the portfolio manager for India at the Clean Air Fund, to go into her presentation. And she's going to touch on the connection to air quality and why it's important that we invest in NMT so that we can clean up our air in our cities. Yeah, Richa, we can see your screen, but
sorry, I was
on
mute.
Yeah,
great.
perfect.
Hi.
Thanks.
I was just saying thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this really important conversation. Let me just.
Yes, boss.
Great. So I'm obviously going to come at this conversation from a little bit of a different perspective, though not unrelated. Just quickly, just to introduce the Clean Air Fund. The Clean Air Fund is a global philanthropic organization that's been set up to tackle air pollution around the world. We're a very young organization. We launched in 2019, and in a time where the health impact of air pollution is increasing and the evidence around the health impact of air pollution is increasing. We're set up to sort of mobilize both health and climate funders as well as stakeholders and actors working on both sides, both climate and health side, to really sort of drive the urgency to solve the air pollution crisis. Like I said, we're a young organization. We've just started to kind of work and deepen our programming in 3 key geographies. So we work in India, we work in Eastern Europe, and we work in the UK. We're based out of the UK, and therefore we have programs in the UK. But we are at a point where we're also expanding our programs and our projects to other geographies. And so quickly, in terms of our vision and mission, our vision is to really sort of mobilize both government and businesses to take action. And our mission is that we want to create ways where the case for clean air is made as strongly as possible, and that and that we kind of look at removing the barriers to scale solutions. We know that better air quality leads to healthier people and healthier planet. But what I think there is much less focus on to date is how it also leads to a healthier economy. And I think this is kind of the point of intersection with this conversation today. Because what we are doing here in India, and I think cities in India, like cities in Africa and other parts of the developing world, are seeing sort of very similar challenges in that despite having a large number of people who actually already engage in non-motorized ways of transportation, the impetus and the power behind kind of expansion of only motorized ways of transportation kind of leads the conversation or leads policy or leads urban design. And so what we are trying to do here in India is come at it from a point of view of looking at what is happening in India in terms of the business case around or the loss to businesses and lost economy because of air pollution. And of course, cities in India, in terms of looking at sources of air pollution in cities in India, particularly cities up in the northern belt like Delhi and cities across the state of Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal, is that the local source of pollution is really what makes people unhealthy. It is what people are most exposed to, and most high number of people who live in cities. Cities are crowded, and therefore the level of exposure to pollutants are much higher. And the sources in many parts of these cities is because of dirty transportation. It is due to diesel, and it is due to unrefined fuels. So what we wanted to do was kind of make a really strong business case and a really strong kind of economic case for cities and the country as a whole to start moving towards solutions. So I'll go into a little bit into the economic impact study we recently concluded here in India. And the idea of this study was actually to tell businesses that they are losing money, and that for them to kind of use this evidence to do more in terms of solutions, both in terms of kind of supporting policies, but also leading the way in terms of technology and technological innovation. And so what we looked at was sort of 6 areas or pathways to calculate the impact on businesses. And these included labor productivity, asset productivity, consumer footfall, premature mortality, health expenditure, and non-welfare market loss. For example, people's inability to engage in activities like caring for the elderly. And I think looking at, sort of coming at the problem around mobility in cities from an air pollution lens is a really effective tool and a really effective strategy. And particularly in terms of kind of getting businesses to start to take a much deeper look in terms of what was happening within their own businesses. So the report kind of unearthed some really, really big numbers for us. The biggest one, of course, was that India was losing $95 billion annually because of air pollution. And we calculated this through the 6 kind of pathways that I just talked about. And some of the outcomes or some of the insights that we got from that calculation was that, pollution was one, of course, was claiming lives of like close to 2 million people a year. And these this premature deaths was also leading to loss of working years. And that, of course, calculates into actual dollars lost. So we calculated that due to premature deaths in India, the country was losing $44 billion in 2019 alone. We also estimated that Indian workers were taking 1.3 billion days off annually because of the adverse effects of air pollution on their health, amounting to about $6 billion in lost revenue. The study also found that many workers could not take time off. They would show up to work because they had to, but their productivity at work was impacted due to air pollution. It revealed that presenteeism, not just absenteeism, which is people are not able to come to work, but also presenteeism, where people come to work, but they're not able to be productive, was impacting the economy. And it was impacting the economy because people would come to work, but their cognitive and physical performance was being hindered. And there was burnout and attrition at work, which was costing businesses about $24 billion a year. And so I think what is really relevant to this conversation today is the deep dive we started to do in cities themselves. We started to look at some of the big cities and the big economic hubs in India, like Delhi, Gurugram, Kolkata, and Bangalore. And these are cities where there's a lot of economic activity. And we started to calculate what was happening because of air pollution in terms of the city's economy. And we found that Delhi was losing $5.6 billion. Gurugram was, losing its competitive edge in the world market because a lot of multinational companies were coming into Gurugram. Kolkata, as the city, was losing quite a bit of money as well. It was losing about 4% of its GDP. And then, cities like Bangalore was losing, where they have, corporate zones in the cities was losing about 12% in workers' traffic because of a direct impact of air pollution. And so what we're able to do kind of by making an economic case of impact of air pollution is to actually go back to the cities and say, you are losing money, and we know that transportation is a big contributor to air pollution. And there are actions that you can take in order to start to mitigate some of this economic loss. Particularly, I think in the post-COVID era, non-motorized transportation is really effective in terms of reducing crowding. Public transportation, for example, it improves air quality and it can help tackle global warming. Non-motorized transportation solutions also supports commercial activities outside of shops because people, are walking, they're accessing shops much more. And it is a much more accessible form of transportation, public transportation in cities like Delhi and cities across Africa as well, because we know that a huge number of people actually are already engaged in non-motorized transportation. We've already kind of heard about examples of cities across the world taking some bold action in this regard. London has put about $2 billion towards expanding infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians. Milan's doing a lot of work around expanding their streets and reallocating street space for cars and from cars to cycling and walking space, and Bogota doing something similar. And so what we like to do here in India is take some of these examples that are happening around the world and really start to kind of connect cities with each other. So there's a lot more learning in terms of strategy, that cities that are kind of already are going down this pathway in terms of building non-motorized infrastructure can start to show benefits in terms of health, but particularly in terms of economy, because for the developing countries like India here, we have to start to kind of or divorce the idea that economic development must include, expansion of road, and that reimagining cities where people can walk and cycle is also economic development. It's also a vision for development, and that level of narrative building work has to happen. And I believe that can only happen when cities start to see other cities kind of going down that path and understanding and adopting solutions that can, that are transferable and scalable. So let me stop there. I will
Great. Thanks so much, Richa.
Sharing.
And yeah, I mean, that's a really compelling case, and those are quite striking numbers. I mean, especially this $95 billion annual loss from air pollution. And I think the Indian cities offer a cautionary tale for much of the Africa region, and especially in Delhi, where there were efforts made early on to try to push for cleaner vehicle technology, but then that was totally overwhelmed by the sheer increase in the number of cars in the city. So it just goes to show that we really have to see how we can also get that mode shift to public transport and NMT. So with that, let me introduce our final panelist, Amanda Gabrano. She's lecturer for urban and regional planning at Makerere University, and she's also the chair of the National Physical Planning Board in Uganda. And she's also an ardent cycle activist, and so I'm sure we'll hear more about that. So Amanda, I mean, I think it'll be great to hear about the efforts to encourage the use of NMT in Uganda. And I know that, we were all impressed by the statements from your president early on in the pandemic when, he was making the case that cycling would be a great way to help promote mobility amidst the lockdown early in the pandemic. So it'll be good to hear how you think we can, build on that high level support to make sure this actually translates into change on the ground, so that we can get complete cycle networks in Kampala and also other cities in the country. So over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Chris. Just before I came here, I had an interview with the KFM here in Kampala about this chapter and this topic. So it's very interesting that today is an NMT day. And Uganda is very lucky to have the NMT policy thanks to UNEP and UN Habitat. The policy is actually more being implemented from the walking perspective. The cycling side, there is very little happening. The pilot project actually came just before the policy, where we have the Loom Street and Namirembe Road, some of the images I shared earlier. It took 10 years to have that corridor, have the lanes as planned, and also the walkways, to have a car-free zone, the first of its kind in Kampala. I think that was a very big credit to Kampala Capital City Authority. It took so long mostly because, again, the business case, the business community in that downtown area was so concerned that with the introduction of NMT, they will lose customers. So we had to explain to them how they will make more money, how their customers are not cars but pedestrians, and how they might get even more customers who have not been coming to that area just because it will have improved. The center of the project was the improvement of the quality of public space to be I'm back. Can you hear me, Chris?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yeah. You lost me for a bit. I'm sorry.
So it went silent.
The corridor.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
The corridor was opened during lockdown. Actually, that's when the roadworks were completed and it was ready for use, with the green cycling lanes and very nice, attractive walkways with good paving, high quality paving. Actually, Kampala really was very ambitious about it. During the lockdown, that's when everybody appreciated that the whole of Kampala deserved and required such a network, such a corridor, as you can see in that picture. So that's a walkway. And around this area, that's my other point, there was a business case compromise because the developer, City Oil, complained that he will use customers, he will rather lose customers. And so there was a compromise. Otherwise, this whole part, this whole section where the cars are was meant to just be car-free. So the access for this fuel station, which also has Cafe Java's an eating place, caused a bit of that discussion where there was a compromise for their business not to be affected. But what we are seeing in the points where we compromised for business case, we are seeing road safety issues. There is a junction slightly ahead where we compromised and allowed vehicles. It's very unsafe because the upper part of it is completely car-free. So you introduce a big population of pedestrians into a conflict zone with vehicles at that junction. The other aspect was the socio-economic aspect, whereby we have vending. We had vending even before this corridor was implemented. So that factor, probably we were supposed to deal with it before designing this corridor. Because now the beautiful pavements, the beautiful walkways and the bicycle lanes have vendors because they used to be there. So now, in fact, it's a cleaner and better working place for them. So this is making it inconveniencing for, on a very good day, busy day, especially in the evening, peak hours, this whole walkway will be full of vendors, tomatoes, onions, you'll see fruits, every merchandise there. So the pedestrian basically has no space. The cars are no longer a threat, but again, the pedestrian doesn't have the space. So that socioeconomic aspect is something that we need to learn from the Kampala's case. The other issue that came up also through the other presentations was parking, especially Catalina's presentation. The parking component, the vehicles are fighting for some of these spaces for their parking areas. And also when there are road expansion proposals, the motorists are also saying this on-street parking should give way for us. So there's a bit of competition. So parking has to be factored in when we are planning for non-motorized transport. Otherwise, they are blocked. We have sections where cars have actually parked in cycling lanes, and they know they even cannot fit properly, but they will park anyway. So parking has to be taken care of. But the biggest issue that we have now with this Kampala's corridor is the connection to the bigger network. It is standing alone. I think that's where the challenge is. It seems to be coming from nowhere and ending nowhere. And this doesn't encourage people, or people may not see that it's actually functioning as one. So the bigger network connection is very important. It should actually come very fast for whichever city that has such a design proposal project in place or in the pipeline. The bigger network must follow as soon as possible. Otherwise, it kind of loses meaning and it gets a lot of criticism from people. The other thing we are not seeing is the drainage. Drainage is a very important element in the NMT comfort and design. We are having issues of flooding. You don't want rain to find you in the CBD of Kampala on your bicycle. I have failed to ride, even today I have failed to ride because the drainage is such a big threat to NMT users. People get swept into the open channels. They hit potholes on bikes. Some potholes look like ponds, sometimes small ponds. I think this is something very major in NMT design because it puts the cyclist or pedestrian at a bigger risk, which we wouldn't want to expose them to. And I think in the design process, the drainage element must not be ignored. the second last bit I would like to talk about is the awareness and the enforcement. Of course, people walk, people ride, but the pedestrians themselves are not used to having their own quality of public space. They are not using to having a decent space for themselves. They think that they should be in a bad area. The car takes the precedence. The car should have a clean motorway, no potholes, but the pedestrian thinks they should be in that zone where maybe a car would be. So they seem to be comfortable and they complain. So the awareness question has to come to show people that, look, you are actually the king. You need this space. Sometimes they fight the real good projects for pedestrianization, pedestrians themselves, because to them, a city is that has cars, that should be seen with many cars. That's a good city. So awareness question has to have several angles in terms of road user behavior, the perception and the status of a pedestrian or a cyclist, but also the policy direction. For instance, our NMT policy in Uganda, it's little known by the urban authorities in the countryside. They don't know about it. And there are a lot of road infrastructure projects going on, whereby cycling is being ignored and also walking is being ignored, but there's an investment going on, there's urbanization going on. So this has to really come to the know of these authorities. And there is also the aspect of public-private partnerships. That's my last bit. I think we need to identify how to give back some of these responsibilities, like maybe I can say a telecom company, to ensure that this road space is used for just that, probably by having a kiosk selling airtime or whatever, and then they do some sensitization, not to leave it all to the public sector, but also to engage the private companies in the process of ensuring that this is complied with. Like the general mentioned, we need to really start acting. I don't see governments in Africa really interested in this subject of walking and cycling. And whereas walking is getting some attention, cycling is still not getting that attention that it deserves. So we really still have a long way to go. And I commend all the cities in Africa that have started taking these bold steps. I thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda. And yeah, I found those points really interesting. I mean, first that, you know, this you have to consider the social factors when you're planning this infrastructure and not just take it as something theoretical. And also this, you know, theme that we've heard come up again, that, you know, even pedestrians are conditioned to be second-class citizens, and we just expect that we're always going to be at the bottom of the totem pole, and we just need to get what's handed to us. So, you know, thinking about how we can empower everyone to really demand the infrastructure that we deserve. So great. In the interest of time, I just want to take a couple questions and present them to the panelists. So one from Heather about gender-sensitive planning, and this goes to Catalina. You know, were the studies in Mwanza and the other cities disaggregated by gender? And did you get any insights about the differences between the mobility needs and you know, and the access patterns for men and women? So let me put that to Catalina.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the question. Actually, one of the challenges we had with the report was that there was very, very little data. So the analysis we did, as this is such a new agenda in the case of Tanzania, in the analysis we did make sure that there was data collected discriminated by gender, so that we could better understand the different travel patterns of women versus men. Also, so that was for the accessibility analysis. But the reality is that, unfortunately, in this particular case of the intermediate cities, we don't have, for instance, origin destination surveys discriminated by gender that give us more precise information on demand patterns of transport. We did find, as expected, that the mobility patterns of women are quite different. And actually, some of the findings from our study point out the fact that women feel less safe in non-motorized modes. Women travel in very different patterns as men. For instance, they use public transport not just in peak hours as the majority of men do, but also there's a lot of linked trips during the day. So yeah, I can share more of these findings, but there is definitely a difference and a need to consistently look at gender differences in urban mobility.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, and we'd be happy to circulate any of the materials with the whole group afterward. And then there's been some discussion about the Kampala case, and this question can go to Amanda, about the legal underpinnings, and do you have the tools to be able to do the enforcement of the walkways and keep vehicles from parking on them, or is that an obstacle? So maybe I can hand that to Amanda and whether you have that in place or if that's something that needs to be addressed also.
I think that was addressed in the NMT design manual, which is not yet out and formal. Probably Claire could shed some more light about it and how far they've gone, or the ministry has gone, but it's not catered for now in the law because the cycling lane was not existing then before the NMT policy came into place. So in the current law, it's not, but it just makes obvious sense because they can't even fit in the lane. They can't fit in the cycling lane because it's about 1.5 meters. It's about 1 meter. So to find a vehicle squeezed in the bicycle lane is just someone's thinking. That's again the perception because it's painted green. Yeah, and the person also has to park anyway. There's a parking need, there's a parking gap. So what should that person do? They have to park their car somewhere also, where they see there's some room for their tires.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, first of all, just make it physically impossible, at least for the large vehicles, to get onto the NMT facilities. Great. And then maybe I can just lastly go to Richa and see, Richa, if you have any ideas about how to tackle this perception issue where even, sometimes pedestrians don't demand the facilities that they deserve. And based on your experience in Indian cities, are there any lessons that we could apply in the Africa region for addressing that? I think we've got you on mute still. Yeah, there we are.
Sorry about that. I think what we found to be an effective strategy is actually to get champions to really own this narrative. And so getting mayors in Bangalore, for example, to take on the challenge of cycling to work, and then connecting different sort of, political champions or influential champions to actually embody this work has been a really effective strategy. The other thing I know ITDP here in India is also doing is working with the ministries of health and transport to put out a challenge for different cities to think about how might they kind of reimagine their cities' mobility in order to really accommodate non-motorized transportation. And lastly, I would say that programs like C40 were encouraging cities to be healthier and think about, particularly through a lens of air pollution and some of the easier things that they can actually adopt pretty quickly in terms of not having to spend a whole lot of money is to think about repurposing kind of already existing infrastructure. And I think, there are some of those like early wins we can start to look at and start to build on the much kind of the harder wins after that. But for cities to kind of, adopt them, feel confident that they're working, that there's support from, policymakers to citizens themselves, and then move towards a broader, much more kind of harder infrastructure kind of wins is, I think, a good strategy to adopt.
Makes sense. Thanks so much. And so with that, I want to give a big thanks to all the panelists. This has raised a lot of issues that I'm sure we'll continue to tackle in the second half of the session. But let me hand it back to Soraya to lead us on the next steps.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My apologies, I had to remove my video because of bandwidth issue. Thank you very much all again. I think we are a little bit behind schedule. So there is a suggestions that we will go directly to the poll and maybe skip the coffee break or the health break rather. I might ask Carly for some help with the poll. Carly, are you connected?
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm here. I think, the poll should be coming up now. And I think the suggestion is please do the poll, but if you do need to grab a coffee or a cup of tea or take a loo break, you can kind of do that and just come back. But we'll keep moving through the agenda because we've got so many interesting speakers still to hear from, and we want to give them the right amount of time. So we'll keep going. And I think Chris is going to facilitate the second session.
Great, thank you, Carly. So we'll just fill up the poll and submit. That's the only questions that you have, or there are several questions in the poll?
We have 2 questions. So we will launch the other poll as soon as we're done with this one.
Thank you. The second question. Okay, colleagues, for the benefit of time and for those of you who are still connected or have taken your coffee or tea very quickly, maybe here are the results. Is bike share a sustainable option for short cross-town trips? Yes, with adequate infrastructure for 65%. 11% said no, the cycling culture needs momentum, and 23% maybe. There are substantial benefits and challenges, but it could work. Interesting. And I guess the second question, the result of the second question is coming up soon. Okay, while we wait for the poll results for the second question, I'm handing back over to you, Chris, for the last session of the afternoon?
Sounds great. Thanks, Soraya. So for the next session, yeah, we'll go into a couple more case studies. And to introduce our presenters, I want to bring on board my colleague Claire Burunji, who's the country manager for Uganda at ITDP. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Chris. I hope everyone can get me clearly, right?
Yeah, very clear.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Chris has introduced me. My name is Claire Birungi. I'm the country manager in Uganda. For our next session, we're going to go into a deep dive session. We hope that this is going to be more of an interactive session, asking the questions. But before we get into that, I would like to appreciate what the previous speakers have presented. They have given very strong, compelling reasons why we should invest in walking and cycling. And I see that most of the reasons that are coming out a little more strongly is the need to reduce road fatalities, the road safety issues coming out a bit more strongly. I've seen pictures on air quality impact. People want clean air when they're in public spaces, or they're taking their walks, or they're even living in the cities. And Catalina also presented about the accessibility issue. I think that's a very important issue to look at it. It was interesting to see that if you improve cycling and NMT networks, that you can increase accessibility to not only like to public transport, but changing the paradigm to access to jobs. So in our next session, we're supposed to have, we're going to have a presentation from Gasho Abera, my colleague, and Penina as well, who's my colleague in Nairobi. Gasho is my colleague in Ethiopia, and we're also supposed to be joined with Jacob Biamkama, who's the director at the Kampala Capital City Authority, and maybe he would be in position to answer the questions that Amanda had posed previously. But in this next session, we want to see how we can make, how can we bring this to a reality? How can we show how these investments, how the cases can be made at the different levels of planning, preparing the strategies, and we shall also have the discussion on how can we see these arguments or these benefits that we have discussed before, how do we see them coming out at these different levels of implementing projects? So for now, I will hand over to my colleague, Gasho, to take us quickly through the NMT strategy. I think the Minister of Ethiopia had talked about this, the NMT strategy for Ethiopia. Gasho, please, you can join or make your presentation.
Okay. Thanks, Claire.
Gasho, just to note that we are a bit limited on time, so please be a bit quick so we can have time for discussions with the participants.
Yes, I will be so quick, and okay, thank you so much. Yes, no problem. Thank you so much. So yeah, much has been said by our minister, and I want to say also good afternoon and good morning for everyone who's joining on this meeting, depending on your time zone. And I can quickly go through some of the contents of the NMT, and much we will focus on what has been done so far after the launch of the Ethiopian NMT strategy. So this strategy was prepared actually by the Ministry of Transport in collaboration with the ITDP, UN Environment, and UN Habitat. Can go next, please. So yeah, this is just to show to introduce about ITDP and its work around the world. And ITDP's major goal is to promote equitable and sustainable transport around worldwide. And we have several offices in Africa and on the other parts of the region also. So the major contents of the NMT strategy are basically focused on three different issues. The first one being related to the street design that needs to be changed in the city. And the strategy focuses mainly on creating a safer, accessible footpaths and creating cycle tracks, dedicated cycle lanes, and also providing proper crossings and adequate shades, adequate lighting, traffic calming, and space dedicated for driving and parking. These were a critical issue that the city was facing regarding the NMT zones. And also our building design was also another concern that we were focusing on our strategy, which we promoting the active frontage along the streets and physically permeable frontage and complementary uses, and also having a compact urban forms. At a network level, we we recommended the city and also at the country level to have cities to have a planning that focus on a smaller blocks than having a larger block where people has to walk a lot of distance, and to prioritize public transport and pedestrians. Next, please. Just to give you a background or information about the country's urbanization, Ethiopia is also one of the least urbanized countries in the world, but recently the country is rapidly urbanizing, and the level of urbanization currently is around 21%, and the total population living in the country is somewhere around 100 millions, and we expect the rise in the number of urban population in the coming years. This is usually mainly due to the migration and also other related activities. Let's take you just quickly through some of the existing assessment. And as I told you, much has been said by our minister, Her Excellency. So I'm not going to repeat, and we can just see some of the cities and their NMT environments. Please. Yeah, this has been presented under Noor's presentation. So as you can see that most of the transportation service in the country, or the travel pattern in the country, especially on the capital city, and also these are the capital cities, Addis Ababa and also Bahar Dar and Redwa are secondary cities, which are larger cities. And you can see the modal share for public transit and walking is much greater than the rest of the transportations. Next. Yeah, this is also just to show you quickly. We can go on these pictures. There are good walkways on some secondary city, which could be a good example. And these are current efforts by the Addis Ababa Road Authority and the Addis Ababa city on the city center, where they're improving the walkway with a nice pavement. And this is older towns in the northern part of Ethiopia, where the cities, they are having these trees as a shade, continuous trees, and giving more emphasis for walking spaces. So this is traditional towns. Even though that there are good things in the country and also most of the secondary cities, but there are still some problems, as the previous presentations, so we have seen in Tanzania and other cities. We're still also on some cities, especially for those transit towns where the roads have been constructed by the regional, by the national road authorities, they misses some of the walkway elements, and even though if they exist, they have been encroached by the private vehicles, as you can see on this picture. Yeah, and the other issue, which currently the city is trying to elevate, especially in Addis, there have been much improvements, but in secondary cities, as you can see, night mobility is really hard because of the there is no light and road safety, and also related to personal security. There are several issues, especially for women and elderly people. Yes, this is just to show you, even though there are some improvements on the walkway that has been done by the Addis Ababa Road Authority and the Traffic Management Agency and other road authorities, road and transport related the offices in Addis, but there are much management that needs to be done. And this picture shows some of the private vehicles encroaching the public spaces or the walking spaces. Next. Yes, this is a good example. This is the same picture from the previous one, where there are vendors, but still not encroaching the clear walkway zones for pedestrian movements. There are some secondary cities actually which cycling share, the mode of the cycle share was high compared to some other cities. This is one city called Bahar Dar, where there were a high number of bike riders, but recently have been dropping because of the increase in the number of private vehicles and also the tuk-tuks or the bajajs. And you can see students are sharing the roads. And at some point, if we don't provide a dedicated lane, then they will leave also this mode of transport and will try to go to the different modes. So just to show that. Yes, and this is also a good illustration that shows that most disabled people, they use the non-motorized transportation, and providing this NMT zone or clear cycling or walkway zones, sufficient zones, will also help the disabled people. So before the preparation of the NMT strategy, there were even some attempts actually by the city administration to provide cycle lanes in the city. So these were some of the cycle lanes that has been done previously by the city administration, but due to some design issues and also proper management coupled with different operation issues, so these corridors have not been utilized or have not been used so far as they were intended before. This is some year back ago, around 2014 and 15. The city was trying to provide a dedicated lane, a cycle lane, but as you can see, they were not completely dedicated. As you can see, so they use markings instead of providing a protection for the cycle lane. So this is a good thing that we need to consider to have a better cycle lanes in the future. The cycling culture is also there in different regions, especially on the northern part of Ethiopia, where you can see this cycle rental is very common, especially for tourists and people who are living on those cities. This is one of those places. And the other, as I mentioned on the first slides, one of the components of this NMT strategy is to promote an active streets where there will be a pedestrian, where will be the streets and also the building will have a good interaction. And this is an old town, a traditional town in northern part, Aksum, Tigray region, where people used to design their houses with a proper arcade, providing additional space for walking. So just to show you those spaces. So to summarize all these issues, so what we classify them under the three different major issues. One is the infrastructure related issues, and the other being the street management, and the third one being the having cycle on your city, cycle culture. So the infrastructure and design issue was kind of inadequate footpath coverage, as you can see on some of the pictures, and unsafe pedestrian crossings on most of the intersections in the city, and there were no dedicated cycle facilities on all parts of the cities. And the street management, we lack parking management, and the street vendors, even though there were good examples in some regions, but in Addis and also some other big cities, the vendors is a huge challenge also, where they utilize most of the walkways in the city. And this related to the cycle culture issue, still the socioeconomic stigma, and also where, especially for a female, the acceptance of riding bikes is also still needs to be done a lot on that. And what does this NMT strategy stands for? What is the content of this NMT? This has been already said by Her Excellency, but just to go through some of the major goals is to increase the modal share of the walking and cycling and public transport, or the active modes, and also to reduce the personal motor vehicles, which also another goal, and also to improve road safety, which is one Ethiopia is very it's well known around the world that most of the accidents compared to the other African regions, also Ethiopia has the highest level of road fatalities and road accidents. So that could be also a solution to improve this road safety, and also improved air quality. This has been also discussed before on different presentations. So we try to do this, and in order to measure those, we have measurable targets that we did that will align with the national and also international goals. And the strategy doesn't talk about only the existing assessment and just go to the proposals to have such certain kilometers of cycle lanes or the roadways or intersections, but it also tries to show how we should be designing our pedestrian networks And as you can see, you need to have a clear different zones, and pedestrians needs to use a clear zone, and the frontage could be used for vendors and other, which will also contribute to the economy of the city or the country in large. And also they need to be also a furniture zone that will protect or that will give shades to the pedestrians. And the other one, which is also currently being practiced in Addis Ababa's road designs, is incorporating cycle facilities. This was also been recommended under the strategy, and much has been improved, especially on in Addis Ababa city, where we need to have certain space dedicated from the road portion to this dedicated cycle lanes. Intersection-wise, so this is also some of there has been so many intersection improvements in Addis Ababa that has been done by the Addis Ababa Traffic Management Agency in collaboration with the Road Authority, and they were using different analyses to find the areas where there used to be a high traffic accident spots, and they identified those, and they were putting several interventions to do a permanent solution to those areas by tightening the curves and also reducing the crossing distance and the refugee islands, where the where currently there has been much improvements on those intersections regarding the road safety. The other issue was the bike sharing system. This is also under the Addis Ababa Transport Bureau, which is they are doing a feasibility study to implement an IT-based bike sharing system in the capital city, and this will also is expected to improve the last mile access to public transports that the city is doing implementing. So saying all those things, but when we come to at a national level, it's not only Addis Ababa actually that has been addressed on this NMT strategy, but those secondary cities, the strategy has proposed that there needs to be prioritization in the city's investments regarding the payment or the money that we're spending for our transportation facilities, and also we need to guide and prepare a set of a minimum and guiding to work with the consultants, and the cities need to do also a sustainable urban mobility studies, especially those cities with a population of 300,000 and more residents. The other one, saying all those problems, most of the, especially those related with the street design and also the building design, could be solved by improving our existing street design manuals and also our buildings design manuals. So currently the ministry, as Her Excellency was mentioning, is trying to improve the design standards, and they are working on the harmonized urban street design manuals, which will improve the speed, the footpaths and cycling zone and the pedestrian crossing and intersections. Will be given a major attention. And regarding the building control regulations, and this has to be done also in the future to improve the walkabilities. This is also quite, I guess most of you are familiar with this car-free list. Has been happening for a year, more than a year, and this is one of the activities that the city and also at a national level is doing to promote and also to communicate with the citizens and forward or outreach the information that they requires regarding the NMT. So we can skip this view. Next. So yeah, we can go. Yeah, back. Okay. So after the preparation of the NMT strategy. We can go next, sorry. After the preparation of the NMT strategy, as Her Excellency or our Minister was mentioning, there has been an NMT implementation plan that has been prepared, and it includes some proposals with 18 major goals. This one of being preparing the sustainable urban mobility with the timeline and also with the agencies dedicated for this, and at some point adding also partners who should be supporting or who could support to this implementation of this strategies or mobility plans or any other developments that the country is trying to do. And these different actions has been set for 69 cities with how many kilometers of walkways they need to improve, which was already mentioned on the opening speech, and also the cycle lane and other activities that they need to do. And the coordinator, or the, as you can see on the right second part, there will be a dedicated office that will be requested to respond to what if some of these activities has been done or not. So this is one of the good things that has been done by at a national level. So also formation of the steering committee is also one of the bigger achievements, where as you can see, different ministries and also their officials will be representing and also discussing on the progress of the implementation of the NMT and what needs to be done on the future. So Bahar Dar city, one of the secondary cities where we used to have this most of the dwellers used to ride bikes. So the city is now starting to prepare this sustainable urban mobility plan, and that will include to assess the existing transport condition and the land use and other related policies. And the SMP planning it consists of the NMT facilities, including cycling and also school zones, retrofitting, the intersection, greenways, and all these elements that are listed here. And this one will make it different because it will have also implementing phasings with individual projects being identified and sent to the city administration so that they could prioritize while implementing. The other one is for the harmonized street design manual. It's already said. So one of the achievements regarding the cycle lane, which I was mentioning, as you can see, these are some of the corridors that are being under design or has been already constructed, and it includes a cycle lane. And these are in total around 41 kilometers of cycle lane are designed and also planned, and also some of them have been already constructed. This is one of them, being from Jamo to Labo. This is also the first cycle pilot cycle corridor that was constructed by Addis Ababa Transport Bureau and a traffic management agency in collaboration with partners. Another new ongoing projects, as one of those pictures, one of those maps showing you, this is a new ongoing road construction projects on the outskirts of Addis, where they're having the dedicated cycle lanes along the corridor. It's still under construction. Regarding the bike sharing, so the city has already prepared the bike sharing feasibility study, and for the first phase, they also identified the station locations by classifying them into 3 different groups: smaller, medium, and larger bike sharing stations. And they are expecting to have at least 500 bike cycles to operate on the first phase. And together with the ITDP and UN Habitat, the city is also developing the websites so that people could recommend the location of the stations and also the location of the appropriate corridors for a bike sharing. So that will be also launched once it's finished. And the other intersection improvement, these are some of the intersections. Yeah, these are some of the list of intersections that has been done by the Traffic Management Agency and Addis Ababa Road Authority. And as you can see in the pictures, this is one of the major intersection in the city where there are several pedestrians, and also there is a collision between the vehicular traffic and the pedestrians. So the city now has, initially they did a temporary intersection improvements, and now they have done permanent intersection improvements, and the pedestrians have a lot of spaces to walk around, and the crossing distance are really narrow, and I'm sure that the road safety issue has been also solved. And this is just to show you the last slide on the monthly car-free days. This is not only in Addis, but this it started in Addis a year ago, but it continues at a national level, and I guess now most of the secondary cities in Ethiopia, they're celebrating, they're having these car-free days at the end of each Ethiopian month on Sundays. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gasho. Thanks, Gasho, for your presentation on the NMT strategy and the bike share system. What I picked from your presentation is that we need to encourage network level design in order to support investment. But also it's good that when we do the plans that we're able to lay out clearly an implementation plan. So I think that helps governments and city authorities on quantifying what investment is required for investment in walking and cycling infrastructure. So that sets out very clear outcomes, I think, for investing in walking and cycling. Next, I think we'll have Penina, who will present on the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan. Penina is a transport planning associate in Nairobi with ITDP Africa. Hi, Penina, you're welcome.
Hi, thank you so much, Claire. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hi, Claire. Okay, fine, thank you. So I'll quickly take you through the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan. And because of time, I really rushed through the presentation. In case you'll have more questions, I'll share my email address for more. So just to start us off, we need to first of all think about where we are as a country. This time I'm just talking about Kenya as far as road safety is concerned. And based on the NTSA data, which is the authority given the power by the government to ensure that road safety is paramount, shared this data that in 2020, we had approximately 3,975 deaths through road accidents. And this actually was an increase by 10.8% compared to 2019. If you look again at the number distribution in terms of the people involved in the accidents, pedestrians were actually among the highest. It was actually among the highest with 1,383 people. Then again, cyclists, though it could be a small number, still a very important, a significant number. Again, if you look at the air pollution, again, of course, attributed by the road congestion and high priority in terms of infrastructure investment focusing on cars, then we see a lot of air pollution, premature deaths attributed by air pollution. Of course, this could also come from industrial, but we cannot ignore the contribution by traffic. And now going to Kisumu. Kisumu is actually one of the 3 cities in Kenya, and we've started working there in 2016. We have been helping them come up with the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan, which we launched. And just looking at how people travel in Kisumu, which is very similar to other cities in Kenya, is that majority, which is 53% of people walk. And something interesting about Kisumu is that cycling is actually part of public transport. We have 1% people who use cycle bodabodas, that's for daily commute. And then of course you have the people who own the bicycles themselves. So we have some significant number of people cycling and walking. But then in terms of infrastructure investment, you can see it doesn't match up. We have very good carriageways, but very limited infrastructure for walking and cycling. This is how the city used to look like. At least it's improving, and I'll be sharing some of those photos. And we had some very major wide streets that are very unsafe for children crossing the road, and this actually increased their risk of accident. And going back to how some of the communities are making interventions, communities just used to, do their, do yourself sort of bumps to just calm the traffic. And it's kind of works, but this just shows that the community understands and put safety as a key priority. Because if your child is going to die while going to school, why would you let them walk anyway? So it's very important to ensure that you have safety on our roads. And then looking at cycling, similarly, we still do not have very good infrastructure, despite the fact that we also have, like I mentioned, boda or rather cycle bodas operating in the city. And so again, cyclists are pushed onto the road, mixing with the private cars and matatus and all that. So in the process, we have a lot of accidents involving the cyclists. So Kisumu now decided to change the status quo, and the goal or the mission for this Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan is to provide efficient, affordable, equitable, safe and convenient mobility for all. This way, safety is paramount, because we know we don't lose anybody. One life is very much important, because in fact, even most of the accidents that happen, they happen around people of their prime age, between 15 to 45. Those are people who are working, school-going children. So we need to ensure that we ensure that at least whatever it is that we are promoting in this mobility plan, safety was paramount. Equitability meant that everyone is catered for, and that's not compromising the NMT users. So the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan was launched earlier this year by His Excellency the Governor. Now it's already adopted for implementation, and we're happy to say that already implementation is happening. So some of the proposals in the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan is to ensure that we have quality walking facilities. We propose to have at least 100 kilometers of footpaths across the city, as you can see in the map. Ensure that we have safety school zones that children are able to get to school safely, and also ensure that even the major highways that are owned by maybe the national government, like KenHas, are able to retrofit NMT or working infrastructure in their improvement. So this is one of the streets, like Noor mentioned in her presentation. We already have Kisumu Triangle project, which has been ongoing, and yeah, at least safety and walking in Kisumu is actually becoming very nice and lively. And another important aspect with the proposal, and we are still working with the city to improve on, is the crossings. So we have several of these pedestrian crossings across the city. We call them the tabletop crossings. They're elevated. They're universally accessible. The pedestrians are elevated. They also act as a traffic calming aspect. So that improves a lot of safety in the streets. And these are just the school zones, like I mentioned, that we propose to have safety enhanced to ensure that our school-going children are able to get there safely. And maybe just to talk about something that is very important in making the business case for walking and cycling, there must be interaction between the NMT infrastructure and the building, specifically the walking, because more people on foot means more people for business. But then we have to ensure that the buildings themselves are able to connect with the pedestrians walking. So this is not Kisumu, this is Westlands in Nairobi, and these people decided to just put some metal bars, so to speak, sort of a fence in front of the building. You know, when the moment you put this, then there's no connectivity, there's no integer connection. It's hard to interact with the building. And so pedestrians will end up using the other side of the carriageway, and there's no safety and all that. So again, we have to do it with massive compound walls, because the more compound walls we have, then again, there's no integer connectivity. So it becomes very insecure for you to walk around such areas. And because nobody is watching over you, because pedestrian safety and security is paramount. And then again, like I said, if you don't allow people to interact with the building, then people cannot be able to see the businesses that are inside. Another important aspect to do away with when you're designing our NMT and connecting with the buildings is that we have to also avoid a lot of parking, high level, like we see this a lot in Nairobi, where you'll see like the first floors are occupied by parking. Again, now you're putting the people who are in the buildings higher above them, the pedestrians. So again, it doesn't make a very good case even for the businesses, because the people will be getting inside to purchase something are fewer. At the same time, it doesn't make it attractive to walk in such a neighborhood, because safety and security again is hard. Because if you're being marked at walking along here, before these people see or come down to help you, you're on your own, you know? So those are just some of the things. So we need to ensure that we have visually active frontages, that we have overlooking windows, that people can be able to walk around, see what's happening inside the building. And most importantly, we have to have physically permeable frontages. We have to have multiple doors and accesses so that, one is able to connect with the businesses. This is how you maximize profitability for the businesses along the NMT corridors. And for Kisumu, what we've been doing, some of the streets are really good in that we have very active frontages, but then what we're also doing is harmonizing with the Kisumu physical and land use plan to ensure that at least along the CBD or along the major public transport routes, we have visually active frontages to ensure that there's that connection and that we can leverage on the pedestrians walking to improve the businesses along the streets. And again, this is the cycle network in the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan. We hope that this is going to be implemented. And again, NMT infrastructure doesn't have to be expensive. Simple retrofits can be able to work. And like this was just a temporary thing, but it was removed. This does not exist at the moment. But you can see with simple flower pots, you can be able to provide a safe and secure cycle network across the city without necessarily building an extra one. And finally, something just to talk about the value of, there have been a lot of discussion from Nairobi and by the ministers about the issue of parking. This is Nairobi, and what happened, this is one of Mama Ngina Street. And so what happened at this time, all these parks used to be parking. And they reclaimed all this space and provided, expanded the pedestrian realm. And right now, this is actually one of the most expensive places to rent commercial space in Nairobi CBD. Expanding, just to show the value of providing NMT infrastructure is just not good for health and climate change and air quality and reduction of accident, but it can also improve aspect of of the businesses, like the people who own the property values on that side. And also now for the cities, because again, parking is also an issue I like to talk about. We have to balance between parking, it generating the revenue, and it being a source, or it actually being a source of investment for NMT infrastructure. So cities need to invest in proper parking management system, and Kisumu is actually in a process. We'll be starting that project soon, just helping them come up with a parking policy, so that now they're able to manage how they use their private cars, and now actually ensuring that some of that revenue that is generated from parking, it is invested back to NMT infrastructure. So that's the end of my presentation, and feel free to reach out in case of anything. I hope I took a little time. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks so much, Penina. That was a really insightful presentation. I think it's very interesting. I think the parking issue is now coming out in the light on how we need to manage parking. But in our case, for investing in NMT, we need to probably have proper parking management such that this can actually be a source of funds for investing in NMT, maintaining NMT facilities. In my city here in Kampala, you see the road funds are allocated to maintaining only carriageways, but there's no funding for, side streets for walking and cycling infrastructure. And it's also good that you touched on how we should design the NMT facilities so that there is that interaction between businesses and people walking. That's encouraging for people to walk, but then it also creates a business sense in terms of lively streets. People are able to connect. I think we've had several cases where streets have been made NMT only, and businesses have improved. They've improved the design of the streets with improved street lighting. We've also seen similar cases in Tanzania where they have made corridors, public transport and NMT only, and we can see an improvement in road safety. Of course, if you have public transport moving at low speed and a lot of pedestrians in the urban areas and CBDs, I think those make strong cases for walking and cycling. I'll just touch on the comments that are here. I think this one is for Penina. Thanks so much for the great presentation, Penina, sharing these value perspectives from Kenya. Great to see that the plan developments. Can you kindly advise how funds were mobilized for the NMT improvements, such as cycleways?
Thank you so much for that question. So what happened in Kisumu, the moment you have a plan, then investors will definitely come up. And what happened with this mobility plan, we've seen a lot of investment by development partners, including Kenya Urban Support Program, who have funded the Kisumu Trago project, for example. We've also seen the city also investing significant amount of revenue into the NMT infrastructure. So the moment you just have a plan, then money is going to come. So I would advise cities to work on the plans first, and then money is going to come, because then the plan is able to guide the investors where they're going to put the money. And as long as, I think this webinar is very important, because now they can justify why actually investing in NMT is important for the businesses, for the air quality, for road safety and reduction of accidents. And just making that as a case, I think cities can be able to get money for that. Yeah.
Yes, Penina, I think that's a strong case. I think we have seen some cities where budgets are allocated, and at the end of the financial year, the funds are going back because there is nothing ready. So I think it's better we prepare now, quantify what needs to be done and how much it's going to cost, with proper designing, of course, and at network level. And then I think then if they find the plans are ready and the case is made, then I think making the investment will be a bit easier to make.
Sure.
I don't know if there is another question. Yes, that was from Caroline Baba. She says thank you and good luck. If anyone has any other question, please feel free to share your questions for interaction in this chat box. Thanks, Penina. Thanks, Penina, for the presentation. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, or if maybe one or two people would like to make specific comments on the topic, please, you can raise your hand and you can share maybe one or two people, perhaps. There is another question for you, Penina. What are the exact school zone improvements you're talking about in Kisumu?
So first of all, around schools, we have to know that we have high number of young people crossing the road. So what we have to ensure is that we have to ensure that the speed limits are very low. We recommend a maximum of 30 kilometers per hour. Then we ensure that we have adequate traffic calming aspects. So we have bumps, speed limits indicating that the drivers need to slow down. And most importantly, ensure that we have safe pedestrian crossings. I've just shared that example of raised tabletop crossings. That I love it because it's elevated, and then so children are more, they are raised at a higher level, so the drivers can be able to see them, And also another aspect, because they are, it's like a fat bump, allow me to use that word, fat bump. So the vehicles themselves have to slow down when they are, when they are crossing over the tabletop crossing. So those are some of the aspects. But of course, you have to do a lot of campaigns around safe school zones and, promoting car-free days, just to ensure that people know the number of people who actually die out of accidents. And, just ensuring that training is done even for the students on how to cross the road. and even the teachers being supportive of that. I've also seen even another organization that actually promote backpacks, school backpacks that are reflective, so that even if it's dark in the evening or in early mornings, you can be able to see a child maybe crossing or using the street. So those are some of the initiatives that the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan takes, but mostly our initiatives are the infrastructural aspect, the speed limits, the traffic calming aspect, the yeah, just that. Those are the main ones.
Okay, thanks, Selena. There is another question about school children engaging in cycling as part of their travel to school, or how are they safe as cyclists on NMT infrastructure?
So actually, Kisumu is very interesting. I remember some time back going around the city and some of the schools that you would find a lot of bikes within the schools, but unfortunately, we do not have a lot of connected and continuous cycling infrastructure in the city. Of course, that exposes them to the risk of accidents, and that's why we are recommending today to ensure that we provide safe cycling infrastructure that connects across the city. Because we may provide in one specific street, but then those children come from different parts of the city and maybe decide that maybe they do not have infrastructure. That's even where we're having a lot of students coming from. So we need to ensure that cycling infrastructure is provided across across the city. And then another important aspect is we have to also train children on road safety again, like I mentioned before, and even ensure that even the cycle designs are gender sensitive, that because you've seen a lot of girls not even cycling because of how most of the bicycles are designed. So to even encourage that, we need to see a proper design. I think Kampala has a very good example. I think Claire has shared that, where the design is comfortable even for a girl cycling to school in a dress, to make it comfortable for people to cycle. Because even from our data in Kisumu, we realize that we have a very small number of women cycling compared to even the men and even the children. So just ensuring that even the type of bicycles that we make out here are gender sensitive, and of course even provision of cycle parking even in schools, because you'll see in schools children are going to tie their bicycles on the trees, so we need to ensure that we provide safe cycle parking for that.
Okay, thanks, Penina. I think in the interest of time, I think we shall go to the next session. In the next session, we're going to have a panel. We want to have a discussion now that we've had on the different case studies. Noor, in the first presentation, presented about what are the arguments or what's compelling for investing in walking and cycling. She made the statistics on what would be if we did not invest, what is there at risk, and what are the benefits if we did invest in walking and cycling. And we wouldn't want this to just stop at this, but we want to build collective action. How do we in East Africa build this collective action on how we are going to continue to support the investment in walking and cycling? So on this panel, I'm going to have Judy Bala. She's the Kisumu City Planner. And then we're going to have Neji Labi from the African Development Bank, and Liz Brill. Sorry, I'm not sure I said that correctly, but the head of mobility and transport at AFD. So I'll invite Judy to tell us what are some of the approaches that we can consider to build this collective effort to support this investment in walking and cycling. Yeah, I'm not sure if we still have Judy on the call. Okay, maybe we can start with the African Development Bank. Neji.
Yes, Claire.
Yes, good to have you on the call, Neji.
Yes.
Please give us your insights and possible approaches on how we can build this collective action. What can we do as an East African region or as Africa?
As African, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Claire, and all the team. Thank you for this very, very interesting presentation. And the real problem is walking and cycling. I probably tell, I don't need to tell you that the problem is real in our cities, and especially walking. Cycling, we are not yet there at this stage, and probably the walking and the crossing in our big cities and capitals is very, very dangerous, and no respect, I think, from motorized users to others, to other modes, especially walking and vulnerable modes, and especially women and females. We have a big problem. In the African Development Bank, recently, and since 2 years maybe, we have an urban division, and we are working hard to put all urban aspects in our projects, especially in roads and transport projects. As you know, the real challenge for the bank since many years is to make infrastructure disposal to our countries without thinking about the different aspects. But right now we have a lot of problems in our cities, and we are facing these different problems, especially working. I think the city is done for people, and people are human, and the human are moving first by working before getting to this motorized modes, buses, cars, etc. And the mentality in Africa is still getting the car is to get some social days, etc. But I think we have to deal first with governments. Governments, they don't think about, when they come to the African Development Bank for their projects, the first, I think, input is to get the infrastructure. They have problems to finance infrastructure. And the first discussion is how to finance this, how to, etc. We don't think about all the different and urban aspects. Right now, the bank is focusing and implementing the new strategy of urban development strategy, and is imposing to all different projects in roads, and especially in urban areas in general, to focus on the urban aspects. First at all is how to be safe for different modes, and especially non-motorized modes. Second is the urban aspects in the terms of getting the infrastructure in its urban context, and including this and implementing the infrastructure to serve the urban users, the urban city, and to be more reliable and more, the service is for urban, and not the first service is to make people moving from point to point in special speeds, etc. Now we have our urban division, and we are employed on all the projects in Africa, transport projects and other projects also. And the bank is imposing these different aspects of non-motorized, and we are going probably to finance strategic studies for non-motorized modes in urban areas and cities in Africa. And we are doing, let's say, we are starting this job with different cities and different governments to make them informed about what the bank is doing and how to benefit from our different finance funds to finance small studies in non-motorized in cities and traffic management and different aspects related to this safety of walking and cycling. Different, let's say, different items are in our, we have the new urban and municipal development fund, which is now working from last year, and cities can benefit from this fund to help them with the small grants to, let's say, study and design, or to assist them to diagnose anything in the city, special transport and non-motorized and etc. So I invite our friends from this workshop, if they have any question, they can send us. We will return to them the Urban Mobility Fund presentation. And they can also, through ITDP, Chris or Claire, send us their request to know more about the bank and its programs for the cities and for the non-motorized, let's say, non-motorized modes in our cities, and our strategy, which is under preparation, etc. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you so much, Neji. Sorry, you can hear me clearly? Okay, sorry. Yes, thanks so much, Neji, for that. It's, I think, awesome to hear that the bank is prioritizing NMT and also prioritizing funding studies in preparation for the NMT implementations in different cities in Africa. Then I think maybe I had a follow-up question on, would the bank, I don't know, how many, do you do the studies? Do you fund, or are these priorities done in a specific region, or is this only within the East African region?
Not in specific, as you know, the bank is working on all African countries, so it's not in a specific region or country, but it concerns all countries, all regions, and all cities in Africa. What we do now, right now, we have the projects. We have the projects, big projects in roads and in big cities like Accra or Abuja or Lagos or any Kenya, or on these projects. Before we don't take any care about this type of modes. Okay, the project is a road, is interchange with all components, and we don't care about the other modes and the surrounding area of the project. The bank now has his strategy. If you have any project in this kind of projects in any city or any country, you need to have the urban part, and the urban part comprises different aspects of urbanism and transportation, urban transportation, urban traffic, urban congestion, urban modes, how to deal with all modes, and all modes must be included, and gender, and etc. So this type of project right now is, we have to do it in all projects. So if we have to put money to make cycling or to make walking sites, etc., we have to do it. It's an obligation. On the other side, we have, yes, in urban and municipal development fund, we have what we call the small grant initiative. This small grant initiative is rapidly, and we can help and assist cities if they need to, for example, know what the problems in their cities, big cities or small cities, about the non-motorized, about the congestion, about the traffic. They can get this rapidly, and we can assist them to help them to get this figure and understand what is the real problems and what is the recommendation for the future. Is the recommendation is to make a big study? It's a big study. We can help them and prepare the TORs and probably look to fund this study. If it's a big project, we define with all the aspects and the components, the bank can also help and fund and search for funds or for cooperation with other multilateral donors. Is it clear?
Okay, thanks, Nate. Yes, that's clear. And also in support of that, I see Babati, also from the bank, has said in the chat box that the bank has set up like a new fund to support project preparations. That's like NMT projects. So that is very interesting to see. So I was just wondering if there is, with these funds in place, is there a way we can build like a cooperation? I know this is project preparation, so we can have like a cooperation of, I don't know if it can be the funding agencies and all other stakeholders on how do we move this also from the preparation to the investment part of it. So there's already good indicators in that support for investing, and setting up a fund, I think, is a good step towards that. So what do you think about building that cooperation with maybe other development agencies or other stakeholders so that collectively we can support or other urban infrastructure such as NMT?
Yes, Claire, it's open to all possibilities.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Good.
Okay. I think thanks so much, Neji, for your contribution, and you've basically given us what do I call it?
Thank you very much.
You've given us the support or the affirmation that the cooperation is possible, and there's already small steps in the direction of forming a cooperation of some sort in the supporting investment direction.
Yes, no problem. We can discuss later and check. Let's case by case. There's no problem.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think we can hear from our next panelists, Lisa from the French Development Bank. Lisa, you're welcome.
Hello, thanks for inviting me. You hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. First, thanks a lot for ITDP for inviting me. I would like to say maybe two things on to address your question about these approaches that we can develop as development bank to build collective actions for non-motorized transport. First, just let me say that as development bank, I mean, we're all convinced here, that's good. So we have included non-motorized transport in our strategy for quite a long time, recognizing all the impacts that have been developed throughout the workshop on accessibility, proper climate, air quality, road safety, etc. But there are two buts. First one is that it's usually not the request of our clients, which are local authorities and governments. They come to us because we provide mainly loans. They come to us for big projects, and they don't want to borrow for a bunch of small things that are usually in the hand of a local authority, to make it a bit direct. So there's, I think, all this work that you're providing on giving tools to convince, not us, we are convinced, but decision makers from all the governments, African government, I think is very important. So second but is that there is a sort of gap for non-motorized. It is too small for a loan. It is too big for a subsidy. I mean, we have subsidies to plan for non-motorized, for sometimes for pilot project. But if you want to do something, you need more than 1 million. And then we don't have subsidies anymore in the transport sector. At least for AFD, subsidies are directed a lot to social sectors for project. So transport is not considered as priority for it. And then it comes to a loan, and then it comes back to my first bat, which is people don't want to borrow it. So that's the first, the context as I see it. But nevertheless, I see four ways, four approaches for us to support such action. First one, and you mentioned it before, is planning, is including that in the planning of transport. 10 years ago, when you said, I'm going to plan transport in a city, you ended up with mass transit plan, costing billions and basically unfeasible. Now, and in particular with the partnership Mobilize Your City that we have launched 5 years ago, we are trying to promote the same actions that you've been doing in Kisumu, by the way, which is planning sustainable mobility, including all components of mobility, not only mass transit, but non-motorized, but hubs, etc. and etc. So first is planning, including in a realistic way, efficient and realistic way. And very often we have come to the fact that there was a sort of first phase of quick wins where we could have all this investment in non-motorized with small money, high impact, and then mobilizing. It's a long time. I mean, building a BRT or tramway or metro is a 10 years project. So in the meantime, do small investment with quick impact. So they come under the quick win option. Second way is through the basic project is just when we have a mass transit project, and I think now that is the case everywhere, we have this complete street approach whereby you not only lay down some tracks or whatever, but you have facade à facade, we say in French, or complete street. You work on the sidewalks, on the lighting, on the cycle lane, etc. So that's easy to raise funds, just as I mentioned, because people come to us for this. But it's not a global holistic approach. And sometimes in India, for instance, I have seen projects whereby you have good accessibility to the station for 500 meters, a radius of 500 meters. And then the cycling lanes stop. So it's a problem. But at least you start with something and it makes, it's like a starter. Third way is to develop city programs whereby you have a sort of different approach. It's not the big project, it's a bench of sidewalks, junctions, cycle lanes, small investment you put together through a holistic approach this time. And you have adapted procurement. That's the program that they call pay for results. You just give them money on a sort of starting, I mean, it's per kilometer, for instance. It's holistic, it can be a possibility, very interesting, but that's also, that's what I'm dreaming of. I'm dreaming of developing such projects in African cities. But again, so far, it is not the request of our clients. Sometimes we do that putting multi-sectorial with our colleagues from the Urban Development Division. They have an approach like they did in Kisumu, by the way, where they have urban equipment. It can be a market, it can be a station, some portion of roads, etc. So a bunch of infrastructure at the level of the city. And the fourth way for us to approach it is through policy loans and having a sort of dedicated axis on non-motorized, whereby we support establishing a national strategy, just as Ethiopia has presented, whereby we support adopting new standards for urban roads. We've been finding, I've seen project, it was in Cameroon, where we were supposed to rehabilitate an urban road and there was no sidewalk, just not planned. So I think we have also sometimes engineers that needs to also be updated on how today we do traffic calming, etc., for urban road. Traffic calming was not taught like 40 years ago. So there's really some capacity building on this. They're still very much on the speed approach. So there's a number of measures that can be triggers for policy loans. And probably we need to develop, I mean, this fourth approach, the planning, the project, the city programs, and the policy loans in order to be efficient.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Your first bats were really interesting. They don't ask for it.
No, not at
Yes,
all.
but
and on the contrary, we have to fight for this. I mean, we are developing a project in Yaoundé where we have to fight so that it's not only car centric. They would ask only.
Yes, before I get into the chat and the questions that might be there, if they can request for quick wins, investments, which are also a small amount, why can't they ask for the NMT infrastructure? Because I mean, sometimes the quick wins can maybe quite a length of a network.
This is my second bet. I would say is that if it's under a loan, there's a sort of minimum that before we process a loan, which is something around 10 million. And it is not always, I mean, it's not always, I mean, I don't want to push people to spend money. So it can be just low cost and that's fine and that's good, but just they wouldn't come to us. If someone is coming to me with a real program and the capacity to borrow and the capacity to have, if it's a local authority, to have the government borrowing for it, because that's one of the points. Implementing agency are at the local level. So we should convince national government to have sovereign loans and on-lend them to the local authorities. That's basically, I'm sorry to enter into the kitchen of this, but I think that's one of the hindrance.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think maybe if when we get joined again by one of government representatives, they can maybe try to answer for us why some of the reasons they don't ask for them. But on the positive note, of course, you've made some really good points, which are also aligning with the ones that we've had from the African Development Bank. So we need an investment in planning. So there is the different components that we need for the investment. We need the planning level. We need the implementation level. So what we're trying to aim at, that cooperation to make sure that we invest, at least we have support from different levels. I don't know if you understand. Yeah, we have support from different levels, and at least we know what the issue is. Asking is an issue, so that can easily be worked on. But it's good to know that the support and the effort is there, at least from
yes,
the bank.
support is this, and for just as African Development Bank, I mean, I think all the donors are aligned on this now, if I see my discussion with all the colleagues. So I think amongst the community of donors, it's 100% aligned. Funds are available to study. It is very well welcomed that we include these components in any project, but it's always an exercise of prioritization that we don't do alone.
I understand, but for me, and I think maybe some of the participants, it's exciting that the money is there, the support is there, so maybe the gap is from us, the governments and the countries and the cities that need the facilities. So
Ministry of Finance, I think it's important. It's not maybe really
true. Yeah, we've had several discussions where the Ministry of Finance is being paid to. So I think there is a need to have the different players in this kind of cooperation. Of course, the governments, the funders, the ministries of finance, and yeah, all those players need to be included. But what I'm getting right now is what we're intending to get to. I think we are having the willingness from the leaders, who is the development funds. And of course, we're doing more in our presentation. We are presenting what the benefits are, what is the business case for this. So we have to sensitize and talk about it more and more.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
And you're doing a great job, by the way. I'm very fan of all the ITDP on this. Huh?
Oh, thank you so much on behalf of ITDP.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Lisa. There might be questions for you, so if you could stay on the line. I haven't been able to get to all of them, but maybe for now, let me get, give me 1 second. I think we are not being, I think Judy may not be able to join in, but I've been informed that Engineer Keno, the Chief Officer Transport for County of Mombasa, is online and can share some thoughts on this approach that we're trying to develop. So Engineer Keno, please, if you can join and give us some of your insights on how we can prioritize and build the action in support of investing in NMT, and also maybe answer some of Lisa's questions. Is it true that governments don't ask for that funding, or is that funding too small? Keno, if you're online, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, in Mombasa, I wanted to ask, there was a question on when Nairobi was presenting about enforcement on the encroachers to the NMT facilities. What the experience in Mombasa was when we did the NMT on like tarmac or paving blocks that are gray, cars parked on them, so they were not used for the intended purpose. But when we changed them to red, and the red carpet aspect came in the sense that we were saying NMT being the biggest mode of transport in Mombasa at 53%, we thought that it would be good to treat those people as VIPs. So the red carpet came from the VIP treatment aspect. Now that, and after the public participation and being told about the same, everybody accepted it. And now if anybody is found parking on a red carpet, as the general public will take a photo and they post it on us. So that makes it easier for us to purposes of enforcement. What that means is that all the citizens are enforcers and you are able to be caught. So that made it very easy so that everybody fears parking on that because you'll be caught and you'll be charged for the same. So that makes a bigger enforcement because it might be difficult to put enforcement officers everywhere, every time. So I wanted to bring that as one way of ensuring that you can actually track people and force them off and leave the facility for the intended purpose. As far as the infrastructure funding is concerned, it's quite a big challenge because infrastructure is very expensive, and indeed we have short funds. The county government of Mombasa does not have enough funds to do all the infrastructure for NMT because NMT is part of the road, and generally the roads are given preference. That is the current thinking, although we are trying to change that kind of thinking to include the NMT, and hence we have a complete street design. So we have consulted the national agencies that provide roads to also include NMT as part of their infrastructure. So whatever they are doing, they are trying to do the same. But we would want to have not only us, but I'm sure all the other cities increased funding. But when from the allocation, from the limited budgeting, it is interesting to see what the French are talking about and the African Development Bank. So then we are also enlightened. We were not asking for it because we didn't think there were avenues or openings for the same. But from these kind of workshops, we are being enlightened with the same, and we would want to probably engage and have support on the same. That would be my thinking for now. Thank you.
Thank you, for your insights. yeah, I think it's a good point that citizens now become enforcers, because I think in certain cities, the enforcers or the traffic police can no longer manage perhaps all the level of encroachments on NMT facilities. And also it's also interesting that you're saying, well, NMT, we've seen that some of the benefits of NMT infrastructure is that it's cheap. And then AFD says that there will be funding. Most of the funding is small. So there is an opportunity. I think there is just a need to align both efforts and needs. And we'll be taking this discussion further in our next workshop about this specific topic later into this year. And we shall unfold more into how can we actually build this strong support or this roadmap and this collective action from the different players with their different interests to support NMT investment. Thank you so much for all your contributions. I think if you have any questions, let me check if there is any questions in the chat. Just 1 minute. Okay, I think there is quite, we are running out of time, and there is quite comments from in the chat. I think Engineer Keno and the panelists, you can try to answer some of the queries and comments and questions in the chat directly to the participants. And I think, thank you so much everyone for participating. I will quickly hand over to Curly from UNEP to close today's workshop. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thanks. So, wow. I mean, sometimes closing remarks feels like you have the easiest job in the world, and then other days like today, it feels like the hardest. Firstly, and most importantly, I just want to say a huge thanks to you, Claire, and the rest of the ITDP Africa team, you've all been instrumental in pulling together the business case research and the organisation of this workshop. So thank you very much, because today wouldn't have been possible without you. Also, a big thank you to all our keynote speakers and our panelists for all of your ideas and experiences and thoughts. So I definitely cannot attempt to summarise the wealth and nuances of discussions today, but I've been sitting here quite quietly, just listening and absorbing, and I'd love to make just some reflections to close out the session. So I think the first thing that really struck me is that there is no one size fits all. Every country, every city, every neighborhood, every rural area, every peri-urban area has different needs. And at the core of getting things right, and I think Amanda really demonstrated this today, is engaging with our citizens and our different stakeholder groups to really understand the context and the specific needs. And I think sometimes with all of the design guidelines and the toolkits and the policy recommendations, it's easy to forget that we can't have a blanket approach, but we have to, the governments and the banks who are funding projects really have to be patient and understand the context. I think the other thing that I keep thinking about is how much the global pandemic has shone a light really on how important a robust and integrated transport system is, and what a difference mobility makes between kind of having continued and safe connectivity and isolation, depending on whether we're investing in all of the people or just a few. I think my other point is that it's really clear to me that transport is not an infrastructure issue. It's an equity issue. And at the moment, we're just not investing enough in the majority of our users. And when we look at the majority of how people are moving, they are walking, and more people would cycle, but we have to start being fair with how we spend our transport budgets. I think it's really clear that the future is active transport. I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that the business case for walking and cycling investment has not been proven. I don't think we can say the same. I'm very biased, but I don't think we can say the same for any other mode of transport, that we have such a positive impact spanning all of the sectors: pollution, health, air quality, congestion, road safety. We can go on. And we've heard some really good examples as to how. And, you know, Major General Mohammed Buddy said, despite progress, we have not done enough. And, you know, I think he really set it out. And I think we need leaders like that who can be honest and say, we're trying, but we need to do more. And the question is no longer how can we do it, because we know how. It's just how quickly can we deliver what we know needs to be done. And I think the government leaders and the development banks really have a key leadership role to play there. And like planting a tree, the best time was 50 years ago and the next best time is now. So, you know, there's definitely a role for everyone. And I think we all have to kind of work hand in hand because we're looking at big challenges. And on that note, I just want to remind everyone, I shared the link in the chat to join the Africa Network for Walking and Cycling. We've got a really good group of 50 organizations, globally Africa-based, but all working on these issues and coming up with solutions. So please do join so that we can kind of keep this discussion going and actually look at practical actions on what we can do as a collaborative group to get things done. So in closing, you know, going back to Major General Mohammed, he also said he hoped this workshop would energize us to do better. And I definitely kind of feel energized personally to keep on with this critical agenda. And I think hopefully you all do too. And thank you to the nearly 150 people who joined us. And I look forward to talking to you all and seeing you in the next Africa Network meeting soon. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Carly. So once again, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And I want to thank the team at UN Environment and the entire ITDP team that put in a lot of work to make this webinar possible. You know, please follow ITDP and UN Environment on social media. We'll also send out the presentations and other materials for the session. Thanks everyone, and bye for now.
Bye.